but your spices, your sweatshirts. I'm really special. I used to have this conversation with you. Now I do.
Somebody's call.
Are you okay? Do you have that? Oh, look at this.
But, of course, but I was just trying to be nice.
Women in our organization.
Yeah.
I haven't answered yet, so that means
That's awesome. That's totally awesome.
Yes. So I'm very smart now. As someone who's only worked, let me see, 4 or 5 years in for-profit my entire career.
You had to have your own business, right?
Yeah.
That's not that half. Yeah.
Just have
Not necessarily, but you know. 4 or 5 years of for-profit experience counts for a lot.
Yeah, see, I mean, it was a year at McDonald's.
I worked in an hour, right? Well, I was in something after undergrad, so that.
See, I was in,
Yeah.
it was an indigenous manufacturing situation, right? We had a service delivery, and that we were all about making sure that the local population was having the correct access. Security was a big point around what we were trying to do. So, and it was all about, we wanted to make sure that we were on time and on budget. There was a timer, so we were like, right at that.
Right.
Cater to the youth. See, cater to the youth. It was very much about youth empowerment, right? There was a workforce development, have it your way. Very customer centric. We designed the food to the pleasure.
You asked me to
We provide
Without nutrition.
This ain't nutritional security, this is food security. They are calories.
Our calories. Yeah. No wonder that you're involved.
No, I did do my
Alright, everyone, I think we're gonna get started. Alright. Good morning, welcome. Bright and early. Hopefully there's plenty of breakfast there, so keep refilling. To get started, I thought it would be great if we could do really quick introductions, and same for the people who are joining us remotely as well. And then we can kick off the events that we have planned. So I can start. My name is Ian, and I work at Creative.
I'm Norman. I also work at Creative.
Eric Cooper with Apt Associates.
Suzanne Andrews, CRS.
Paul Perrin, CRS.
Jacqueline Carlson, BAI.
Mark Trohart, Internet Center for Innovation and Learning.
Rocío Funes, Diver.
Aaron Manuela, NPI. Alana Pikowski, and then also at Actors.
We went to prevent creative.
Andrea Thomas Stalbert.
Keith Macaro, Frontline SMS.
Alicia Janifer, Creative.
Jared Ford, NDI. And Nate Barthel, CRS.
Nicole Anand, Reboot.
Wayne Bota, FHI 360.
Krista Baptista with DAI. Carol Boswell, CRS.
Mike Dawson, FHI 360.
Sam Russick, Creative Associates.
Jeff Coop, Creative Associates.
Jen Godson, sorry.
Brooklyn, Creative. Lee Sutton, Creative.
Godson.
Creative.
And
Kathy Lee, Reboot.
And walking in, can you introduce yourselves as you come in?
My name is John O'Brien. I'm with US8.
I'm Glenn Burnett. I'm with Practical Action. That's it. I'm Creative. And on the phone and via video conference.
they have.
Hi, I'm Jackie Dealstra. I also work for Creative.
I'm Diana Kane. I'm with Medic Mobile.
Two more.
We can see you.
Okay. And R.
Okay, we'll trust you there. Feel free to jump in anytime. Thank you, Ryan, for getting everyone here and getting us started. I'm Sean Carroll. I also at Creative. I run the cross-functional group, which includes technology for development. I want to thank Leland Kruvant, our Vice President for Strategy and Management, for joining us this morning. When it comes time to deciding on and endorsing these principles, he's going to be a key player for us here. So I'm very glad you joined us for the conversation. I just wanted to say two things to start out, in addition to welcoming you and thanking you for being here. I participated in a discussion a few weeks ago now, and Ian did the next one, and I'm very glad Ian raised his hand to volunteer to host this first discussion on the first of these principles for digital development. A couple of things that stuck out for me in the conversation we had a few weeks ago was that, one, we had a very interesting conversation about whether these principles aren't really principles for development. And I think we all agreed that, yes, in fact, they are more broadly very good principles for development as a whole. But I think we also agreed that it would be good to keep the focus on technology for development, on digital development, because we have a moment in time. It's a long moment that started years ago, but it still is somewhat in its infancy. And I think there's an urgency and an importance and a relevance that will have people focus on it more than they might if it were broadened to, say, principles for development. It might get kind of lost. Whereas if we say we're really looking at what is now clearly a here to stay but still growing important part of all of our work, we can grab people's attention. And also, when we need to, perhaps play on people's fears of being left behind in the digital revolution. So I think it's important and useful and strategic to have it stick with a focus on digital development. The other thing we talked about is that most of these are pretty non-controversial. There will be a couple, and it will be important to distinguish, and particularly important to talk about the principles later on that do pose larger problems mostly because of incentives, right? I think when we look at some of the bullet points under 6 and under 9, there'll be more discussion. The rest of them, I think, we'll probably find are pretty, not only non-controversial, but we would say, well, obviously, these are principles, and we would say, and we do those. But in fact, I think the discussion will probably be around the issue of it being hard to do, and that we don't do enough of it, and that it really is important to understand, embrace, and endorse these set of principles. So with those couple of comments, I thank you again and look forward to this morning's discussion. And I turn it back to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Sean. So I thought it would be great, since we have a few guests who may not be aware of the principles, to spend a minute or two really quickly talking about what the principles are. And for most of you are probably already familiar with that. So I'm just going to go ahead and screen share.
Also, Ian, we have a few other people just joined. Ian, we also have a few other people.
Oh yeah, right. So let's actually quickly go back and do introductions and cancel Infinity. All right. So some of the folks who just joined us online, would you really quickly state your name and affiliation, just so that we know who else is on. Go ahead.
Olga Shevsky from Catalytic Relief Services. And I'm a chief solution architect for CRS.
Ognan Plevevsky, architect for ICT4D Solutions, CRS.
I'm Diana Kane. I'm senior designer at Medic Mobile.
All right. Thank you. All right. Going back to the screen share.
Infinite.
Great. So, for For those of you who are not familiar with the history of this, I just wanted to point out that this has actually been around for about 5 years in the making. Does that sound about right? So this is not something we woke up this year and decided to put together. It's something that implementers and donors have been working towards for a while and realize the importance of it. And right now, as implementers, we're trying to bring those principles to reality. So to give you a sense of who the drafting organizations are here, you can see it's USA, UNDP, some of whom we have in the audience over here, UNICEF. And what the principles are, I'm just going to do this for now. Keep skipping. There are 9 principles. Each of you have a handout, so I won't spend too much time going through them. What I do want to say is this event is on the first principle, designed with the user. We expect to actually have similar events for the other principles as well. So thank you for joining in this so-called test of how we would do this with other implementers, and also a test on technology of how to do this with other implementers, because we're using telecom in terms of cell phone, we're using Hangouts, so it might be crazy. And if the guys who are joining us, you are our guinea pigs.
The guys who are joining us on the line, are we sending them a copy of these principles? Or?
Sure. So those who are joining us online, these are the principles, and you can see my screen right now. And if you also go to, actually, I should pull up the site as well so you can take a look real quickly. If you go to ICT for the principles.org. Oh, great. The letters there. All right, round 2. Alright, now ICT for the principles.org, you can actually read the principles and look at the handout as well. And we'll post a link at the end of this so everyone can see it. So today's session is focused on design with the user, and if you have this in front of you, you can look at what are some of the subpoints of that principle, which is up here as well. And what I'm going to do is actually just jump in straight into our next event instead of reading this out loud. What I do want to say is the reason I'm really excited about having you all here and discussing this principle is because I've been this principle is one of the core principles, I believe, in just generally the work I do. And over the years, I've worked on different products and created different products, and I came to the realization that really my goal, I'm really not that smart, and I would say that all of us here are smart, but not that smart. At the end of the day, what we design and what we deem as innovative really comes from the people who are using it, and all we're doing is connecting the dots or looking for sparks. So I've in the past I conceptualized a product with users, and we grew it and ended up building a company. And also what's really common in business world is, apart from as you iterate and with users and change what your product is, and we often we actually changed the business what we were doing based on what we found users were interested in, which is completely different from what would be cool technologically or what we thought would be great going into it. And so in the business world is really good at seeing this. They pivot, they are able, what they're doing, they're able to create new product lines, and all of that comes from listening to users, right? And it's such a core principle for work and software development in general, that I really coming into development, international development, I really like this is sort of the background that I come from. And it's interesting to see that while all of us in the room here and as a community, we do believe that this is great, that we should design with the user, it's often just not, it doesn't happen, it's not necessarily practical. We sit down in boardrooms and design what projects should be, and whereas designing with the user. So with that in mind, I wanted to open it up here and get to our panel and esteemed guests so we can start this discussion. So to kick it off, I'm going to quickly change slides over here. Before I actually jump into the slide, Diana, would you like to say hi again, just so that people know who you are, and then we'll bring you back on the slide share.
Sure, sorry about that. I lost my microphone there. Hi everyone, I'm Diana Kane. I'm Senior Designer at Medic Mobile. I'm calling in from the West Coast, so it is extremely early here. So, but I'm really happy to be with all of you today to talk about this topic.
And for folks who don't know about Diana, I thought I'll give you a couple of sentences about her, which shamelessly I pulled from the website for everybody, so we'll be reading. It's interesting because the first line that describes Diana says, Diana's role is to befriend community health workers and leverage human-centered design to translate insights into practical tools. And she's worked for 7 years in countries such as Rwanda, Kenya, Nepal, and South Africa. She was one of the founding members of a group that co-created the mHealth platform, Kumbu Health. She has a patent on a medical iPhone app, and I think I will stop over there. So Diana, I'm going to I turn over to your presentation so that people can see that, and so can you, hopefully, and you can just ask me to tap it, and I'll move forward. So.
Great, thanks. So are you going to put, sorry, are you putting the presentation up on your screen?
Yes, is that fine?
Okay. Awesome. Okay, hang with me for a second, everybody. This is the first time I managed a presentation just like that. Okay. So I'm going to have to direct the slides, I think, by voice control here. Is that right? Okay.
You can actually share your screen as well. You want to try to do that?
Well, we've got this going, so why don't I just jump into it like this? I think it'll be all right.
Sounds good.
Okay. The first slide. Second slide. Okay, so Medic Mobile was oh, too many slides forward. Second slide, please.
Lose control.
Okay. Okay. Medic Mobile was created on the premise that 1 billion people will never see a doctor in their lives. Yet we know that people do have access to a cell signal, and they live close to community health workers who are, as I'm sure you're all aware, people who are based in the communities in which they live and serve as a point of contact to the healthcare system. So we saw an opportunity here, and we consider ourselves a nonprofit tech company on a mission. We're building mobile and web tools for healthcare workers in context where people may never see a doctor. And our tools are there to help health workers to register pregnancies, track diseases, manage stock levels, and communicate about emergencies for the first time. These are tools that help health workers reach more people with better care. We do this in a way to strengthen the whole continuum of care. So we're actually looking at how to deliver healthcare in a more connected and efficient way. And we look at how we can deploy multiple use cases to improve access, adherence, and quality of care at all levels of the healthcare system. So you can see that diagram up on the screen now, where we're actually looking at how to intervene in communities as well as create tools that help decision makers further up the healthcare system food chain. Next slide. In order to successfully integrate into the system, we first need to understand why it is the way it is and what the existing challenges are. And so in order to do that, we need to understand the people that make the system that way, what matters to them, what their challenges are, and how technology can help. Next slide. To do that, we use a human-centered design framework. But really the point I want to make today is that human-centered design is as much of a mindset as it is a methodology. So we actually have to care about our users in order to gain meaningful insights and have those translate into tools and services. And as Ian framed it really, really eloquently just this morning, is it's not always convenient. Things that we learn when we go out into the community is really pivot our tools, they pivot our use cases. We're constantly looking for new ways to adapt to solve priority needs of the users, as well as create tools that are intuitive and that are familiar for them to use. So it's definitely something that we have to be committed to. I want to begin, before I jump into some methods, by introducing you to our users. Hopefully these are people that are also familiar to you. Nurse Mary is a nurse in a rural clinic, say in a country like Malawi. She sees up to 50 patients a day and experiences frequent staff shortages and stockouts. Her clinic is a 3 to 4 hour drive from a district hospital. And I'm assuming that many of you know someone like Nurse Mary. Our next user is a community health worker, and we call her Janet. She is the main point of contact for up to 20 households in her community. She's received some basic community health training. She's a mother, so she can empathize with the challenges that other mothers in her community experience. And she provides health education and referrals to the families in her village. And then our last user is Prudence. Prudence is 8 months pregnant. She lives a 3-hour walk from the health center, and this is her 4th child. She's always delivered at home. She feels quite disconnected from the healthcare system. So these are examples of our user personas as an organization. So you can stay back on Prudence for a second. User personas, it's a product development word, and essentially they're characters, and these characters remind our whole team who we're building for, and they're very active members of our team. I don't say this in jest by any means. It's a very common phrase to hear among a medic team conversation as we're discussing how to prioritize new features or make user experience decisions for our platform. Of having someone ask, well, what would Nurse Mary think about that feature? How important is it to her? And regardless of whether our project manager is sitting in Nepal or in Kenya, everyone knows who Nurse Mary is, and we can all really identify with the challenges she experiences. So it takes a lot of really complex issues, and it brings us right back to the core of them. And their approval is how we measure success as a team. I really appreciated Ian's point about how the business world is really good at doing this and pivoting based on the customer. The difference in the global health world is that the customer and the user are often different people. And so being committed to the user's feedback and perspective is of utmost priority to the medic team, and we explicitly design for our users and not for our customers. The next slide. So people often ask how becoming friends with community health workers and with Nurse Marys and with Prudence, how do you actually practically translate that into products? It's one thing to say that you know these people, and another thing to figure out actually how to address their challenges. So I'll go through a few methods quickly. The first is with every project and every new use case, we start by understanding the current context in which people find themselves in. So what you're looking at here is a visual needs assessment map. This maps out the various lines of questions that we might look for when we go into a new setting. We're looking for strengths as well as challenges, and we're looking for current problem-solving strategies. People are often very resourceful and have their own workarounds, and those are clues to us for how technology can help. And we do this in an incredibly visual way. So this topic today is designing with the user, not for the user, and I really appreciate that framing. And in order to design with the user, you should really expose your work and your assumptions as much as possible. So I come from a global health and sociology and anthropology background, and I have stacks of notebooks from field work. Sort of in the transition to being more visual, I think back to those notes and how many incorrect statements I probably have captured over the years because there was really no way for anyone to validate that what I was hearing was correct, and especially when you're working with a translator. The more visual you can make your note-taking, and in this case we use sketches quite a bit. I've had users take the pen out of my hand to correct a drawing that I was working on, and it really invites people to be part of this initial design process. We actually also use sketches as a contractual document between us and partners, because it's amazing how much can get misinterpreted in a paragraph of words, but how clearly a sketch really lays out what you're talking about. Another method is what I call live sketching, when it's not always practical in the context in which we work to have a large sheet of paper and markers out on a table between you. So this is working with a group of community health workers in coastal Kenya. And we actually just role-played a workflow. So you can see the sketch in the bottom corner. And this is a really effective method because it allows people to actually troubleshoot various challenges that arise in the workflow. So, as you're directing a workflow or asking people to show you their common work, their work practices, people will introduce challenges into this workflow. It's really amazing. I once had someone try to break this workflow by telling me that she couldn't refer the mother to the facility because the mother didn't have any money. So I was able to redirect that question back to the group of community health workers and ask what they would do in that situation. And it was incredibly fruitful for us as designers to understand what that workaround would be. Because otherwise I could deploy a technology product, it could fail, and I would have very little insight into what the actual challenges were. So this is a way of really quickly prototyping before you build anything. This is another method that we created in order, again, to expose our workflow. We call them design cards. There's people cards, place cards, action cards, technology cards, like various medical props, because we work within the healthcare space. And you can go to the next slide. This allows us to build out a system very, very quickly and, again, in a very interactive way. So even more interactive than drawing. As people are describing sorry, you can stay on that slide for a second. As people are describing their practices around seeking care during labor and delivery, I'm able to lay the cards down to mirror what they're saying. And then people actually get involved and move the cards around, or we can introduce new cards, like what would happen if you had a cell phone, or what would happen if that road was fixed, or if you had access to a motorcycle driver. It's a way of envisioning a new workflow as well, so now we're starting to bridge the gap between the current and the desired workflow. It also allows you to pivot questions really easily between different phases of the workflow. This is just another image of using the cards during some role-playing in Nepal earlier this year. You can see she was assigned to play the role of the community health worker and had that card to represent that. And in the next slide, you can see them actually being used on a whiteboard. These cards are actually available on our website. So many of our partners wanted them, so we put them up there for purchase on our website. Here I'm just using actually a sticky tack behind them, but we'd like to create a magnetized version so that they can be used also on whiteboards during trainings. So through all of that empathy work and all of the brainstorming work and designing with our users, those help us to generate design principles which guide our product development. This is where the conceptual gets really practical. And these principles are they're not direct quotes from users. They're things we'd like users to say. They're representations of how we want people to feel when they're using our product, so that as we're designing the product and making these UX decisions, we can go back and see if we've accomplished this. Did someone say this about the product that we're putting forward? So in the next slide, this is just a screenshot of our product, but it's essentially saying that if Nurse Mary, our hypothesis is that if Nurse Mary feels comfortable using the Medic Mobile platform, she'll have a greater impact in her community. We want her to feel like this is a tool that was actually designed for her, so that she can take it and use it in ways that maybe the program didn't even design for her to use it. Not only do we want her to feel comfortable using the platform, but we want it to do things that she needs it to do. We want it to solve her challenges and support her work so that she can have a greater impact on her community. So we believe that's what she's looking for as well. So here's another screenshot of the pregnancy registration screen. If you go to the next screen, this would be a Nurse Mary view of her incoming messages based on those design principles, and a dashboard of really relevant and actionable information. We've done a lot of user testing of these dashboards and connected them directly to things that Nurse Mary wants to affect and doesn't have the information readily available to her at the moment. We're really excited to announce that beginning next month, you'll actually be able to download Medic Mobile for antenatal care coordination from our website. This is a sneak preview of what our new website is going to look like. And this is even further extending our tools out to community organizations. We felt that community groups all over the world are doing really amazing work and can't always access the resources that we have. So we're starting to package this up in a really, really friendly, do-it-yourself type of version of our enterprise level software. So we have 9,000 community health workers like Janet using Medic Mobile in 21 countries right now, and we're getting feedback all the time. Our product will never be finished because we're always prioritizing new features and building out new use cases. So thank you for listening. Here's a couple of links, including to the design card, just might be particularly relevant to this conversation. And I look forward to any feedback that you have.
Thank you, Dana. Great. So now I'm going to announce, invite Matt here to talk a little bit. Folks who are online, are you able to see the screen properly?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. All right. Full screen. All right, so our next speaker and panelist here is Manthia, and I'll take a few seconds to introduce her and do the same as I did with Diana. Manthia is Reboot's lead designer. She actually co-founded Reboot and focuses on research, design, implementation, and evaluation at Reboot. She's really interested in the practical applications of ethnography and systems thinking in delivering effective international development and governance programs. A little bit on her bio: she's worked in over 20 countries such as Afghanistan, China, Nigeria, and Pakistan in different sectors such as education, financial inclusion, government accountability, human trafficking, and public health. And before this, she was at the UNICEF Innovation Lab, is that right? And worked to leverage technology for development, and also set up, interestingly, Palestine's first open source software community. So with that, Manthia, hopefully I will not have to go through the skipping of slides anymore. And you can grab a seat.
Thanks for having me. When Diane and I were talking yesterday, we thought she would go a bit deeper into the methods, but I wanted to talk a little bit around sort of the notion of design for the user and the multiple users that we might need to be designing for. So pretty simple when we talk about it: co-creation, user-centered design. But as we talked about, the implementing it for any user group can be complicated, and in the context of development, it can be even more so. And I think when we talk about user-centered design and when we talk about user-centered design and when we talk about user-centered design, people often point to the private sector as having really good examples of how we should be doing it. focus on the customer, iterate and adapt.
This mentioned 204 since.
Put yourself on mute.
Collecting lessons learned and stuff. The point of this stop is.
You can find out who it is too. It'll show up. It'll show up really big.
No, everyone's still good now, so.
Alright.
You guys were quick enough.
I mean, if it had happened on slide 10, I would have been a bit offended, but slide 2, I'll assume it's not me. And so, so we often point to private sector examples, but the thing about the private sector is the private sector generally sort of design is a bit more straightforward. Jared's nodding. You have to design for your customer. You are often coming from the organization that is going to be providing the product or service. And so in the development space, we have to contend with multiple stakeholders, complex politics, and often environments that we don't know very well. And so in this case, what does designing for the user mean? And which users are we talking about? And I think that in thinking about ICT for the, we often, everyone says, oh, technology is only 10%, but we don't, but we still focus the conversation on the ICT part, even when we say that. And I think one way that we think about it is how can we design for development, and when do ICTs make sense? Because when we're introducing, I think a lot of the conversation about introducing ICTs and being able to change power dynamics, enabling citizens to participate, we are changing power dynamics in a particular context. We are changing the way that power can be allocated, the way who has voice and who has the ability to input. And so when we're trying to use ICTs and take a technical approach to changing sometimes can be complex factors relating to governance and the distribution of authority, we have to think about how to design for institutions, civil society actors, and the other users that may impact how beneficiaries engage with products and platforms. So which user are we talking about? And I want to sort of go through one project or a portfolio work that we've been working on in Nigeria with the World Bank, trying to use ICTs for social accountability, to talk a little bit about what I mean in a bit more concrete detail. So, I'm not good at this.
You can use this one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the World Bank was interested in using ICTs, this is maybe not the best photo, to get citizen feedback on the delivery of government services. The idea was that, first of all, we are providing services now via mobile platforms, the ubiquitous platform, and likewise, we can get feedback back on how we are doing. And so the initial thinking, the initial idea was to design a mobile platform that citizens, and the conversation was SMS or IVR, Frontline or Rapid, how do we get feedback back? And we realized pretty quickly that in working with the government, why would the government want feedback? Would they actually use it? If we want to change the way services are being delivered, do we want to first understand what the incentives may be for government to open up to feedback or not? And so we started by trying to understand how government works. Like what Diana was talking about in Understanding First Mary, we were trying to understand how various government ministries made public spending decisions, how they made design decisions, how they made programming decisions. And one of the areas that we were looking at that the World Bank wanted to get input on was on road spending. Road spending because there was a lot of corruption in the road sector. Now, contracts in this one particular state were 3 to 11 times their actual value. And so we thought if we got citizen monitoring and we were able to do site visits, citizens could report back, this would change everything. Perhaps. Roads, we found out by conducting a deep institutional ethnography with the Ministry of Works, Budget and Planning, Ministry of Finance, we realized that there are very good reasons that road contracts may be 11 times their actual value. The governor in this particular state knew, for example, that there was a lot of corruption in the civil service that he had inherited. And so by establishing massive contract vehicles for one road and hiding new road projects within them, he was actually reducing the amount of corruption and kickbacks that would be given out in each road project. Similarly, 85% of contracts in this one particular state were given to 5 contractors, all of which had a direct personal relationship to the governor. Again, this is something that the World Bank wanted to expose by citizen reporting, civil society activists doing budget monitoring. But you realize in getting to know the government and building that trust that there are very good reasons for this. This government was operating in a highly volatile fiscal environment, and they couldn't guarantee that they would pay their contractors. So the only way that you're going to get contractors to work for you is to call up people that you know and say, don't worry, I'm good for it. You will get paid 6 months from now, a year from now. And so there were very good reasons, that the government did not want to open up to citizen feedback and was not interested in using these platforms. And indeed, we tested, I think there were 6 different donor-funded platforms that collected citizen feedback in Nigeria when we were first doing our initial analysis. We spent 30 days calling or visiting the offices of or sending emails to every single one of them. Not one single request was answered. That's a lot of money spent on ICTs and citizen feedback. So having developed this trust with the government, having understood their needs, we started to design for them. So how can we understand what their fears are in opening up and what their incentives might be? There's an election year coming up. The government has done a lot of good work. How can we open up government data to show the good work the government has done? Transparency, accountability, it's a process. It's not turning on a switch. And through this process, by saying, hey, we get why you have to operate the way that you do, we were able to build trust and implement a series of policy reforms which led to the launch of the first open data portal in sub-Saharan Africa. That was pretty exciting. And so now we have them open to the notion of public engagement. What next? So there was this presumption that if we just launched a mobile platform, citizens would participate. Not necessarily true. The notion of the social contract in an oil-rich state in Nigeria, which does not collect or has difficulty with tax collection from citizens, it's quite different. And so how do we then stimulate the idea that citizens can participate and can influence the way that government is doing things? Radio. Everyone talks about radio and in Sub-Saharan, how can we use radio? And the thing in Nigeria is here, I think it was only liberalized in '96, and so the media landscape was still relatively immature. And what that meant was a lot of the content was news talk, entertainment, sports. We wanted to start stimulating public interest journalism. We wanted to develop public dialogue through platforms that people were already using, but in this case, it wasn't just designing program content that appealed to citizens that may report. It was actually designing for the media conglomerate that owned this radio station. It's one of the largest media conglomerates in Nigeria, and what's the interest for them to invest in public interest broadcasting when there is not a history of such in the state? And so in this case, we started conducting market research on what the potential was, which topics citizens may be interested in, and found education to be very, very salient, of course, for parents, citizens, communities, and something that had commercial potential. And so started designing a program with them and now you can see education alongside business, world, entertainment, and lifestyle is at the sort of very top of their interests. And by designing this platform, designing this program with them, and we also obviously employed the user-centered design process to understand what content would appeal to parents and citizens. So it was not just, this is how public spending and education works, but also things like, topics on curriculum, nutrition for children, things like that would appeal to parents and then get them involved. So the radio program is called The Portal, and essentially it features a lot of different types of topics that would be relevant to parents, but also get them interested in topics on education spending, on government performance. And over time, we're seeing first of all, the research that we're doing is feeding into things like this that's stimulating much more sophisticated dialogue and much more sort of nuanced conversation about government performance than we saw when we started the program, I think 8 months ago. Well, now it's been over a year. But after 8 months, what signaled success to us was that the media entity, the parent group, continued to sustain this program commercially without donor funding. And now they're launching another series of public interest journalism programs. So now we have citizens talking about government performance. Only then did we think we were ready to then go directly to citizens. And so the idea of the mobile platform took a couple of years for us to get to. We realized that the market was not ready, but now that it was, now that it had been primed, how do we then go to citizens and get them to input? And so I'm not going to sort of rehash the design process that we went through here, but essentially it actually appears sort of very similar to a lot of what Diana talked about. But the point for us here was that this could not have happened immediately. This program is called ICT for Social Accountability. The ICTs were important, the open data portal, working with the radio stations, using social media channels, but for us, getting to the citizen feedback part was actually sort of the last part of that chain. And so this is an SMS platform an SMS app that allows citizens to report on the quality of healthcare service delivery. And it is both a structured survey and an open-ended response platform that they can do in clinics or outside. And what was important to us, and the whole reason that we started with trying to understand government and to design for government, was to then enable us to sort of close that feedback loop. So this is in another state, but we essentially went back and working very closely with the the National Primary Healthcare Agency, worked to understand their workflows, their processes, what the best way was to input them this feedback back. And so at the national level, for the actors sitting in Abuja and the World Bank here, they got a dashboard. They got a dashboard to be able to monitor performance across different states. But really where service delivery was happening was at the facility level. At the facility level and at these and at the state offices that these were being monitored. The officers in charge were getting coached and training. And they did not, of course, have access to computers and to intranet. And so we have automated reports that are generated every week and delivered by field workers that go to each facility to talk through the feedback categories that are most relevant to them, and to talk about then what this means for their week-to-week management of their staff and their facility. And we got this citizen feedback that is now coming in as a standing agenda item in the weekly meetings of both officials at the state and at the local level, which sounds not a big deal, Okay, it's an agenda item in a meeting, so what? But we recognize that meetings were the primary channel by which these actors came together and decisions were made. If we did not do that, this feedback could come in. No one had incentive to act on it. No one was going to be looking at it. And so in this case, the analog, the face-to-face, the personal interactions were just as important as the feedback that was coming in via the digital channels. And so this is sort of how we thought about designing a mobile feedback platform and the process that it took. First, getting the institutional openness, feedback, and understanding their processes and where this could fit into their workflows. Then, stimulating public interest in participating in these conversations, and then finally going to citizens and inviting their feedback and inputting these back into their government processes. And so, well, it's really exciting to hear about a lot of the interest in using ICTs for development, and I think a lot of the conversation is around, while we recognize we have pilotitis, I think this is a term that Wayne maybe often uses, there's a lot of pilots, but I think despite the fact that we, as a community, feel like we may not have gotten the basic building blocks right, we're constantly talking about newer technology, newer ways of doing things. The conversations now around sort of big data, real-time data, and how that can influence development programming, they're fascinating, and it's fascinating to think about the potential. But part of the challenge is, do we ourselves understand whether or not we as a development community can actually use, for example, the big data, the real-time data that's coming in? If we want real-time data to influence our programming, do we have the procurement policies and structures in place to be able to pivot quickly and act on that? And so it's really exciting to see a lot of donors convening this conversation about ICT for D principles. And the last conversation in New York on this talked about not just what NGOs, development organizations, implementing partners need to do to implement them in practice, but how donors recognize that they need to change the ways that they operate, the resources they provide, the policies that they put forth to enable firms like ours to be able to do ICT for D more effectively. So that's a little bit of our perspective, and that was somewhat useful.
Thanks, Matthew. All right. We have hopefully one more presenter before we open up for questions. Tapan, are you there?
He hits his alarm button. Snooze button.
It is early for them, and I really appreciate, especially the folks who are joining in from the East Coast. It's super early, so thank you for waking up while I would have been sleeping.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll take a few seconds to introduce Tapan. For those of you who are not familiar with Tapan Parekh, Tapan is one of the foremost researchers when it comes to ICTs for development. He's an assistant professor at the School of Information at University of California, Berkeley, and his research areas include human-computer interaction, mobile computing, paper and voice interfaces, and information systems for microfinance, agriculture, health, governance, and education. He teaches ICT for social enterprise, as well as user interface design and development at Berkeley. And he's had several students who have become very successful and created companies such as ComCare, Avast, Capricity, Nextdoc, Acopio. So it's a pleasure to have Tapan over here, and his list of awards goes on, but I'm going to turn it to Tapan to bring a different perspective on designing with the user.
No.
You're on mute, Tapan.
No, still can't hear you.
No, we can't hear you.
Can you unmute?
Oh no.
Oh no. That was good.
A lot of Tapans.
Are those are the topics you know?
Back. Tapan, can you see? All right, perfect.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Great, thank you.
So thanks very much for having me. Great to see a full room here talking about designing with the user in development. So I really appreciated the prior panelists' comments and presentations, and I'm really going to try to build on those. In the interest of time, I'm not going to use slides, and I'm trying to keep it short, because any moment I'll have, two small children behind me, and so, I don't think you want them to be part of the presentation. As Ian mentioned, I'm a professor at UC Berkeley, and one of my focus areas is on design as well as international development. And at Berkeley, what I really try to think about, is how we can take the ideas of design and the principles of design and embody them in systems and platforms that can take those kinds of ideas in some way to the next level, and also thinking about ways of coming up with new design methodologies, new design philosophies that can go beyond what design does for us now. And so I'm going to try to contribute to this this conversation by proposing potentially some more ambitious principles for design in the context of international development. And so, one idea I'd like to propose is, when we think about user-centered design, a lot of it is about trying to meet the user where they are. What their context is, what their incentives are, what their motivations are, what their abilities are. But one idea I'd like to propose is, trying to think about design for where users want to be or where they will be tomorrow. And in that context, I'd like to think about, not only design with the user, but design for aspiration or design for appropriation. And so thinking about what the natural trajectories of users are, where they might be in a week, in a month, in a year, in 5 years, and how we can design platforms, systems, institutions in a way that we can grow along with the user. And so as an example of this kind of design approach, I'd like to talk a little bit about a system we developed called Awaz Day, which is now a functioning social enterprise and company based in India. The initial idea for Awaz Day was very much about meeting the user where they are and trying to address a major bottleneck or challenge that they face. So the initial context was in the context of an agricultural radio program in India that was produced by a local NGO for the local FM station. And there was a real challenge with this radio program. It was a very popular program. It was listened to statewide. But there was a real challenge for farmers to be able to provide feedback into the program in the form of questions they might have, comments, suggestions, notes of appreciation. So the radio on-air personalities used to have a call-in part of the show, but really, it was a constrained resource. Whenever the call-in show was there, it was very, very popular. Everyone would get busy signals, and so we tried to think about how can we increase the engagement of users with this radio program, with the personalities on air, and how we can use the properties of the internet and technology. Basically things like asynchrony. As a way of addressing this bottleneck. And so we designed an IVR, interactive voice response system, that allowed farmers to call in, leave messages, and allowed those on-air personalities to respond to those messages when they had time, when they had the ability to do so, using the internet, using the phone, whatever they had. And so that was, very, very successful. It made, the users very happy that now they could actually call into the radio program. They could get answers from these on-air personalities. But then we thought, what's the next step? Where would users like to go with this? This is addressing an immediate problem that they have. But what would they like to do next? How can we think about the trajectories of these kinds of systems in other online contexts? Social media, question and answer systems, blogging, et cetera, and think about what the likely trajectory of these users are. Where would be the next step they'd like to go to? And so one facility that we developed in this system is not only to allow farmers to ask their own questions, but to be able to listen to and benefit from the questions of others. And so we introduced a browse, search, and filter functionality that made all the questions accessible to farmers. And so now not only are they benefiting from their own question, but they're benefiting from everybody else's questions. And so now we're introducing, these properties of the internet into this kind of initially very one-to-one kind of communication, and making it a many-to-many communication. We're making it a system where really we're supporting peer learning, and that's really thinking, in terms of these users, what's the next step they might like to take? Where might they like to go with this? How can we learn from how similar systems have evolved and use those same kinds of lessons applied back to this system? And so that was a very, very successful innovation, and many, when we conducted an evaluation of this system, which we published in 2010, a lot of the farmers told us that the biggest benefit of this system was not only getting their own questions answered, but being able to learn from the questions of other farmers and learning about things that they may not even experience firsthand, they may not have had even direct experience with, but are problems faced and that they might face in the future. Now, the next thing we thought about is, now that we've created this kind of peer-to-peer kind of learning system, what's the next step farmers might want to take? What's the next thing they might want to do? And so we thought, here, they're just really still responding to content and consuming content. And perhaps the next step is that they'd actually like to become producers of content. They'd actually like to produce their own content. They'd like to actually be creators in this kind of ecosystem. Not everybody, but at least the farmers that had something to say, progressive farmers, lead farmers, they might actually have something to contribute directly in terms of their own content, in terms of their own experiences, in terms of their own idea. And so the next step we took in terms of the design of this system is we took it from just a question and answer system and a social media system to actually a content publishing platform. And that's really what a WASDE is now. A WASDE is essentially a voice-based, phone-based content publishing platform where it makes it very easy for anybody to create essentially their own narrowcast or broadcast voice messaging system where they can create their own pool of listeners and where people can subscribe to their messages. And now we're seeing more and more what we're calling voice streams being created by end users, where users are deciding to start publishing and creating their own content. And initially the seed of that might have come from just their questions of being very popular on the original social media site. They're finding that other farmers are listening to and relating to their questions, and that creates the motivation for them to start and create their own publishing and dissemination stream. So that's again going from one-to-one to peer-to-peer to one-to-many, right? And so now you're making users actually following them on the trajectory of just interacting on a one-to-one basis to learning from their peers to actually becoming content publishers themselves. Now the next step, I think is in terms of technology. Most of our users are still on so-called dumb or feature phones, but more and more we're seeing that our farmers are adopting smartphones and initially smartphones do not as much adoption of data services. But I think that's really the next step here, is that farmers will be increasingly adopting smartphones, at least in our user population. In other user populations, they may have done so already. But farmers will be adopting smartphones, they'll be adopting database services. And so how can we use that to really take the next step with this kind of platform? I think one of the major opportunities this will create is really reducing the cost of these services, both for us as a service provider, but also for them as consumers of these kinds of services. And so we're really looking forward to those kinds of opportunities, and I think it also creates opportunities for potentially increasing the interactivity and expressivity of these kinds of services. And so I think that's really the next step. And so really this is the story of designing for where the user is now, but also thinking about where the user might be in 5 years and 10 years down the road, and then thinking and including that kind of thinking in the design process and in the system building process. Now, the next kind of, thinking, farther ahead in terms of design is, typically when we think about design, it applies to, we're typically thinking about design in the context of the user interface. The user interface is typically where we think about the design processes as being most applicable and relevant, and in terms of application functionality. But how do we go beyond that? How do we go beyond that in terms of thinking about how design applies to even more fundamental considerations in the design and implementation of technology? And so can we think about design as being as a way of not only designing user interfaces, but as a way of designing databases and data representations and implementations of how can we involve users in the design of databases and data specifications and actually in the implementation of software systems. And to explore these kinds of ideas, we're developing another system right now at UC Berkeley called Local Ground. And so Local Ground is a mapping, data collection, and really like a database that's designed for kids, for youth, anywhere from the age of 10 to 20, I would say. And so within Local Ground, what we're really exploring is ways that we can involve users in the design of representations of data. fundamentally in the design of databases and in uses of that database. So within Local Ground, we make it really easy for users, first of all, to just upload all different kinds of data. And so the initial motivation for Local Ground, which started as a mapping platform, was looking at how we can make it very easy to upload geospatial information and georeference that data. And so, you know, the initial idea for this came in Ethiopia, where we saw that when we talked to the Ministry of Agriculture, you know, they really had very little data about how local land use patterns in some of the agricultural regions in Ethiopia. And then when we visited a lot of the farmers and the farmer groups and farmer communities, we saw that there were really, really rich representations that they had in terms of hand-drawn maps and records about how those spaces were used. And so initially, Local Ground was designed as a way of uploading these kinds of hand-drawn maps, georeferencing them, and being able to add other kinds of data to those maps to make it make them available for planning and decision-making purposes. So that's really, again, a story of meeting the user where they are now. But the next step we saw, you know, when we brought this idea back, you know, to California, where we are now, is that, you know, these problems exist, you know, these kinds of planning and data availability problems exist right here where we lived. And so we applied these same kinds of ideas here in California, while in the process of involving local youth in the design of a public park. But thinking about whether the user would like to go next, you know, the kids that we were working with here in California, they were interested not only in participating in the planning process, but they were interested in making their own databases and the applications. And so we started working with youth in an after-school program who wanted to really make a database of employment opportunities and after-school programs in the Bay Area that would be accessible to youth. And so they designed their own database, essentially, of after-school programs. They decided all the different columns that should be in this database, all the different rows that should be in this database. And in Local Ground, we designed a user interface that would make it really easy for these children to design their own database. And so for some of you who work in software development, you know that, you know, the databases, the user interfaces for designing databases have never been designed with you know, average users in mind. You know, designing an SQL schema is not something that's immediately obvious to even a relatively advanced novice programmer. And so how do we make this process of database specification really accessible and really easy for people to do from all different kinds of walks of life? And if you think about that kind of idea, it has a lot of power, because designing a user interface allows you to design one application. Designing a database allows you to design a whole suite of applications. And it actually embodies, in a certain way, an entire class of applications that are made possible fundamentally by how you choose to represent that data, what data you include, what data you choose not to include. And I think by involving users in the process of actually just making those kinds of decisions, you increase their power and agency in this kind of process by an order of magnitude, because now they're able to decide not only what applications are possible now, but what applications will be possible in the future. And so we're really interested in thinking about how we can involve users in that level of decision making within the design process. You know, how they can actually play a role not only in interfaces and functionality, but also fundamentally in representations of data, and thinking about what applications might be possible in the future, fundamentally on the basis of how we decide to represent our data and what data we choose to represent versus not represent. Now, going beyond that to the next level, you know, once we've thought about how, you know, we involve users in the design of databases, the next step is how do we involve them directly in the implementation of applications. And so, kind of the current things we're working on in Local Ground is a very simple programming framework on top of this database that makes it very easy for these youth to essentially build responsive web-based applications. And so how can they connect these data elements that they've created to visual representations in the user interface that makes it easy for them to display this data, interact with it, query it, filter it, and fundamentally create applications on top of it. And so in the case of the after-school programs, the kids designed a mobile application that allowed users to search for, map, visualize, and browse all of these different kinds of after-school programs and potentially contribute their own. The most recent application we're working on this summer is of a similar nature, but it's around educational opportunities. It's around thinking about how children, in high school, I shouldn't call them children. They're really, but they feel like children to me. These youth represent the different kinds of educational opportunities that are available to them. What data they feel is important in terms of the local schools, colleges, and using that to design an application that helps youth make educational choices about which schools to attend, which classes to take, how to best prepare themselves for college. And so, again, this is going beyond just thinking about the application functionality, the user interface, but involving youth in the actual decisions related to representation of data, database design, and actually having them play a role in implementing that functionality in working applications. So again, just thinking about how we can take these ideas of design further. I think one, how do we go beyond where the user is now and think about where the user will be in 5 years, in 10 years, and build that into our design process, into our implementation process. And two, how do we go beyond the user interface and application functionality and involve users actually in design decisions related to data, databases, data representation, and actually in the implementation of applications. So yeah, just some forward-looking things. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Evan. All right, we've had some great discussion here. So we're running a little bit late. So what I'm going to do right now is, instead of asking the questions I had at hand, I'm going to open it up straight away to the audience to pose any questions they have for Duncan, Anthea, or Diana. And folks who are online, feel free to speak up as well. So open it up, any questions. The microphone's on the table. You can speak into that, or just speak as loudly as I am.
I was curious where these students are located and what sort of feedback you got from them.
I assume that's a question for me?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so these students are located in the Bay Area. We've been working in Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond. So these are just towns in and around Berkeley. A lot of our work has been with so-called underrepresented students, Latino, African American students, women also. So they've been predominantly in high schools or in after school or summer programs around the Bay Area. The feedback from them has been, I think, really, really great. So we taught, last spring we taught a class at a charter school here in West Berkeley that was titled Data, Design, and Social Change. And it was really, it was a really amazing experience both for us and hopefully for the children also, for the youth also. Initially it was very tough. If you taught in high school, you realize it's really, really tough. And so about halfway through, we just couldn't even maintain any level of discipline within the classroom. People would be leaving, coming and going. We just had no control. But then really people started showing up consistently on time, and we're at class the whole time. And we really didn't understand what was going on, but we sensed this kind of qualitative shift in what was going on in the classroom. And at the end, we had a little, pizza party, and we had a little debrief on, what students thought about the class. And they were like, when we asked them, about this transition, they were like, at first, we didn't trust that a class could be like this. We've just had seen all our other classes and how they are, and how they're, kind of relatively unidirectional. And we really didn't believe that a class could be different. And they told us, that once we realized what this class was all about, we got really, really into it, and we realized the kind of power that this kind of process has for us, and the immediate relevance for our own lives. And it was like this, heartwarming, stand by me kind of moment. It very rarely has happened to me in this kind of work that I've done. So yeah, it's very exciting. And now we've continued this class into a summer program that we're running with some of the students, and we've really built a relationship and gotten to know the kids really well. It's really also an advantage of working close to where you live. Here they're right in our neighborhood. They're just down a few miles away, and so we get to see them regularly. We get to work with them regularly, see them walking around town, and so it just really makes a qualitative difference.
Hi, I had a question.
Hi, Tapan. Oh, please go ahead. I can ask later on.
Okay, I just had a question for Panthea. In terms of, you described the process a little bit of your project and how it sort of started out with one set of maybe directions or assumptions of the template that you used, and then you adjusted and kind of started with working with the government and then with the radio. Can you talk a little bit about what was happening on the side dealing with the World Bank? How was the donor kind of relationship going? Because I think that's really important for us to think about, is how do we navigate this with our customers, right?
That's a really good question. And so this was a series of projects that we worked on with their social accountability team, and I think over time, I think early on we recognized that we needed to build not loopholes, but space. You needed to build space
for innovation,
for learning and adaptation. And so I think a big part of it is often just finding the right champions and the actors working within donor organizations that you're working with. It was interesting to see the UNICEF Innovation Principles from 2009, because I was on that team when we first developed those, and I remember at the time we're like, well, and even now the conversation is, well, you're pushing a lot of this risk onto implementing partners, onto NGOs and contractors and whatnot. And so at the time is, well, what do we have to do on our end to make sure that we hold up our end of the bargain? And how do you find the right procurement officers? How do you know the right loopholes? How do you know? And I think in a lot of our projects, we the way that we evaluate new opportunities, at the very top of the list is who is the other person, who's the person on the other side of the table, not the organization. Do they get the way that we work and the way that we would want to work? Are we building in enough time at the outset in the conception period for learning? And is there, and we almost always have a period after 90 days, depending on the duration of the project, to then revise the contract, basically, based on what we're learning. And so for the social accountability portfolio, that was sort of very much the MO.
We had a question online. Before we want to go?
Yeah. As Tapan was actually telling us about how we should be sure about thinking what would be the next requirements, or till what stage a user wants to scale it, or to think about and to keep in consideration the future requirements of the user. On that part, he laid emphasis on using of smartphones or some platforms for the dummy phones too. On that part, I just wanted to ask one question. What are his thoughts upon on considering the user environment or the execution of the solution? The environment in which a solution will be actually executed or implemented or used. What are his thoughts upon considering those environments?
Well, I mean, I think as all my panelists would agree, that's absolutely essential. I think design is very much about understanding and spending time in the context and realizing where users are, what their constraints are, what their opportunities are, what kinds of infrastructure they have access to, what kinds of devices they have access to. But I think as in our role as designers, we're essentially a bridge between that world and the world of technology and the world of policy, etc. And so we really need to kind of bridge between that knowledge and the knowledge we have about where technology is going, what's next on the horizon, and what we expect to happen in kind of the policy and market environment to really predict how those contextual considerations will interact with trends in technology and in the market.
So I have a question for Panthea. I think on the contractor level that we often get very encouraged to push things out the door as opposed to looking more at some of the process and techniques for understanding the communities that we're working with. And I was wondering if you could speak to some of the techniques that you used in the Nigeria project to understand what content people were interested in interacting with.
What content in terms of the feedback?
For the radio portion of it, you mentioned that you worked with users to see what content.
Yeah, so in that one, when we were, first of all, in choosing education even as the sector to focus on, first was just understanding where government spending was happening, what was one of the signature sort of priority efforts of that particular administration, and understanding where citizen impact could actually shake things up. You know, this is something that they were communicating a lot about, and so then having an alternate narrative emerge about these model schools that had not been constructed would be sensitive and would be something that would get a reaction. On the user side, we assembled a working group. We call them our technical expert group. So these were sort of teachers, parents, school administrators, retired government officials that had worked in government previously to essentially look at the content that we were going to be putting out weekly. We had done design research with parents and people that we thought would be interested in listening to the show, but also people that were more elite, if you will, elite users of technology. So you saw the Facebook platform, for example. We knew that only a certain percentage of the entire market was going to be able to engage it there. That said, they were the loudest and the most active, and I think there it was also recognizing that we're not always trying to design for the end user. I think sometimes there's this bias towards designing for the end beneficiary, the end user. And so what were the society sort of proxy groups that we were working with that would then be able to represent citizen interests, and how do we sort of first work with them? And so so we, working groups, design research, a lot of deep interviews, individual sort of ethnographic interviews, and then we basically just tested. We just tested and tested. We kept putting things out and just constantly tracked the analytics to see how particular content we're performing, things like that. And for the whole time, the radio station that we were working with, they were very engaged on this. Brought in a media trainer from BBC, to work with them on how to produce compelling content. And so that would appeal to users because they were used to doing entertainment content that had more intrinsic value of some sort.
So, I think we have time for just one more question.
Oh, good. All right, I'm going to jump in and take it. And this question is for Diana, for you, but also Panthea, I think you have definitely input on it. The design process you were talking about, especially Diana, yours, gorgeous, amazing. But how long does it take? Essentially, my understanding, Manic Mobile, you don't have as much funding as some other organizations, but you have very flexible funding. Other of us are in larger organizations that have not so flexible funding, even though we might have more of it. And we're often under deadlines. The expectation from day of award to a demonstrable process progress within 6 months, or half the time they want it in 6 weeks or 6 days or some stupidity. I'm concerned that the time it takes to spend that time with the actual constituents to get what they want and develop what they want is longer than the patience of those who are funding us to do this work. And so there's always that tension between having the most, or having a good amount of constituent feedback into the design process and just doing what we've always done before to be able to hit the deadline to make the donor happy. You still there? You've got some thoughts on that? You're on mute, it seems.
Awesome question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess the first challenge I'll put back is, can you afford not to? It's a much more expensive process to roll out a project which isn't based on users' needs, which will then fail or need to be rebuilt at a later stage. So that's often our answer when people come and challenge our design budgets. But But it's a really relevant question, and it's something that we do come up against. So at Medic Mobile, we've identified a number of priority use cases, which we've put a lot of design work into, and now understand how they operate and how they can be adopted in different contexts. So for something like antenatal care coordination, we can go into a new context and be pretty lean about our design work, because we have a sort of a best practice or a default understanding based on a lot of really robust design research, and can ask really pointed questions and do some really lightweight design work just to see kind of which switches we need to flip for certain contexts. So that helps us make that process much leaner, so that we're not starting from scratch every time. And our regional teams are really involved in those use cases and in replicating them across different contexts. For the use cases which fall within sort of our innovation arm, I really look at that as an R&D arm, just the same way that you wouldn't expect a biotech company to come up with a new device or a new drug, without doing really high quality work. So I think it's also challenging ourselves to take this work really seriously and see it as a process which is worth investing in, and educating our customers and our donors to see it that way as well. So the more that we publish the impact of this kind of research, I think the more we've already started to see the funding shift towards these more flexible cycles. But for those customers which are inflexible, we would not take on an innovation project with those customers. We would take on a priority use case with those customers, because we could more confidently budget our design work and sort of estimate our impact up front. Whereas with a new innovation project, I really liked Panthea's idea of having a 90-day pivot or revisal process once you've gotten into the design work, because it's really a scary thing for designers to have to go into a completely new use case, a completely new set of users, and have to promise something to donors. I'm sure we can all relate to that. So that's how we approach that.
Yeah, you've defined our life, actually.
I can empathize.
Just a quick point on that. I think it's a challenge that we all face, and I think especially in the ICT for Needs space, where I think sometimes people feel that by inserting technology, because technology is supposed to make things faster, easier, they forget that it's still development. You still need to have the conversations, the dialogue, the stakeholder engagement, the negotiations, and part of that is the design process. And I think that there is more donor education happening. The last conversation about the ICT4D principles, we were batting around the idea of having donors themselves sort of meet a certain set of criteria before being able to sort of sign on to these. I don't know how realistic that is, but it is interesting if they're asking their implementers to do this. Do they realize the time, the resources, the investments that they need to make to be able to make these principles actionable? And I think one of the interesting is that, for example, the USAID's Global Development Lab is doing, we're working with them on an institutional ethnography of themselves to understand where they themselves are barriers to be able to enable adaptive, responsive programming, focusing at the mission level, but obviously that has significant implications for implementing partners. And so they're starting to understand, well, we have this evolutionary acquisition mechanism, but why is it not getting used? Is it how we're messaging about it? Is it the hassle associated with it? Is it? So I think there's some of that bubbling up, but I don't think it's certainly mainstream by any stretch.
If I can chime in our experience, taking the time to get to know your operating environment, taking the time to know your processes that are involved are crucial. We had an example where one project had presumptions that they could not take out these attendance papers from a school, and so they had to go in and manually copy those over. So we chose a certain technology for them in order to do that. But when they started out the project, it turned out that they actually can take out these school attendance sheets back to the office. And so then the technology we had suggested didn't work because it was easier and faster to copy the data onto Excel rather than type it into a mobile device. And so had the project managers taken the time to learn this, we would have saved a lot of time on equipment and money as well. So even though it does take the extra money, it's way worth the investment in the end that you're saving. Basically, you could be looking at saving the project overall.
All right, I'm going to step in here. Sorry, we can't take any more questions, but it's the next. This is actually a good segue to the next segment of what we're trying to do. But just to end it up, I'll take a question from Guatemala, from Stuardo. We will definitely collect all the links that people have discussed and posted up on the site. So you will have information to access. There's also a lot of other information on the site, such as toolkits and that you'll be able to access about designing with the user. But thank you, Tapan, Diana, and Panthea for waking up early and coming all the way to DC for this part of the event. The next session is actually going to be conducted and facilitated by Wayne, who is going to help us take what we've just heard and start thinking about how this applies to us and our day-to-day work and the challenges we face. So please stick around. The reason we have the online mechanism this way so you all can continue to engage in the rest of the events of the morning. So stick around, and Wayne, you can take over.
Sure. So I thought, watching these three presentations or these three discussions this morning, I don't know, looking at Diana's activity, I thought, wow, wouldn't we all love to do that, right? Wouldn't we all love to start our project? This is okay, the first 6 months of your project is you get to go out and sit down, okay, USAID or whoever the donor is gave you these big points they want to do, but your first 6 months is really just to go out there and actually spend real time figuring it out versus the 30 to 15 days you had to write the proposal, right? And so then I love this concept that at 90 days we'll come back and tell you if what you want is what really can be done, and then move into an actual implementation based around this. Has anybody ever had that happen?
Well,
once?
I'm dying to say something, but I want to
go for it, Clyde.
Well, I think a couple of things were brought up which are really important, and I'm going to completely oversimplify what Panthea had to go through to get to start the work that she was doing with the World Bank. But when somebody goes to an organization such as Reboot,
right,
they're going to them because they know that their foundation is design thinking and human-centered design. And so you're already ahead from the beginning. That's not why they come to the rest of us.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we have to think about is, the relationships that we currently have with most of the donors are based on traditional, long-term, development work and not necessarily incorporating this. Now, I'll say that we did hire Reboot to do some work for us, and they created a great report in the Patra region in Pakistan, and also a guide on how to use human-centered design in development, and particularly media development. But see, it is that we now use when going to donors. And so it's not Internews trying to say is, hey, we've got this great idea that we'd like to try. It's to say, we've been working, we invested in working with a group such as Reboot that has produced these products and now these guides that we're trying to get our organization and our field teams to use. And so I think that these principles are great, and the fact that the first principle is user-centric design is great, but it really is a lot of the advocacy work that now needs to follow to show that this is something that we're all using, and that there is something very significant about it. The last point is that already, I think that when the really big RFAs come out, organizations are investing on getting people over to a lot of these countries to do some research already. The big ones they are. And so in those cases, that's when you use these principles of user-centric design. There are situations in which we do it. And so I think that we just have to make sure that wherever we have the opportunity, that we start to do that. The last point I want to make is that when we start talking with donors and respond to a lot of these, the way that we've responded to a few of them is to say, okay, you're asking us to do all this over 5 years. That's great. Well, we can guarantee that we'll do these various things, but what we would really like is a 90-day period at the very beginning of the whole process of the project to get on the ground, reevaluate after, using human-centered design approaches, and then to have the flexibility to adapt those and adjust those as we go on. And so the more that we can incorporate this in our responses and our to proposals and our dialogue with donors, that's the only way for me, I think, that we're really going to be able to change things.
Have any of them accepted those 90-day?
We've had some, we've not to the degree we'd like them to, but the dialogue is definitely open. And the last point what Panthea was talking about with regard to the USAID Global Lab, exactly. I mean, they are looking across the organization and they are seeing what they are confronting and they are really trying to change things. And so the fact that they have invested so much in that effort means that the donors are looking at this. But it's now on us to make sure that we have kind of a united front with supporting these principles.
I kind of want to give a little bit of a different perspective, and maybe it's an INGO perspective. So, you know, we're not in the technology business. Could you speak up, please? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Here we go. So we're not in the technology business. So what we think it's our job is to figure out how to select the right technologies and adapt them to support the work that we're doing. So, you know, what's really important to us, because, you know, in any kind of system you put together, there are usually multiple technologies involved. So it's really finding those technologies that you can very quickly adapt on the ground as you introduce technology in response to what you're hearing from your users. So it's kind of a different perspective. If you're in Magnetic Mobile, the business of building systems, you know, the process you're going to use is different than if you're an INGO who's really looking to select technology that can help you solve a particular problem and how you engage. And the second thing about donors, you know, a lot of our early, you know, work in using technology in the field was started after we had a grant. And it was a matter of coming up with a concept and getting the donor to agree to allow you to try that concept because it was going to deliver some benefit. You know, it could have been, you know, reducing the cost of you know, what you were doing, or increasing the timeliness with which you had data to make the decisions. But it was going through that process of understanding, you know, your current business process, what you thought you could use technology to increase the effectiveness of that process, and then making that case. And didn't necessarily have to be at the beginning of the grant. You know, so just keep your thought.
So I think that it's interesting. I think it brings up a good point here, and this concept that, you know, we as implementers, and I use that term broadly, so all of us doing work from smaller boutique firms to the larger organizations, right? I think we do have a bit of clout, we do have a bit of point, and I think sometimes we are a little too responsive to donors. We kind of just roll over and say yes to whatever they ask, no matter which donor it is, whether it be individual or bilateral. I think to a bit we should be doing a lot more donor education, you know, buyer education to make them understand. Because I was just thinking, like, to your point about there's times when you pick somebody or you work with a group to develop something new, and times when you're trying to adapt. And I loved DePaun's concept of appropriation, which I think we do the least and the worst at. But this concept that right now, at least I often feel, we take whatever the RFP is, and we oftentimes in some of these large organizations, all we think is RFP, RFA, RF whatever. We never really think what would we do, and then go out and find that. We're always just waiting and, you know, pushing to see what will come out of the great bilateral door. And then we just respond as we wrote in the past. And however, you know, it worked yesterday, we'll do it again today. I think it's these principles, and this is an opportunity for us to change that dynamic a bit and push back and say, that's great, this is how it should be done, and speak with more of a unified voice. Because I think we're all tired of some of the mistakes that you see happening again and again. Love to open it up for people to give thoughts on how we can marry some of these interesting concepts and things we've heard about this morning to the realities of our process. see a lot of heads nodding, but I don't see very many people talking. I thought you're not the shy one.
So I've been thinking more about this week, and I think that there are a few ways that we can incorporate some of these methods better into our programming too. And one is working with the donor, as you said, to having the statements within an RFP that says either about design or process, so shifting from not only deliverables, but shifting to the process of it. I think that would be something that would be helpful. Also, I've been impressed with Divid's inception phasing at the beginning, and so just taking more time to understand what the current activities are on the ground. And usually with USA projects, we push that more to the recon in the RFP phase. So having that period of time at the beginning of different programs, I think is really helpful. Another thing that I think we need more of is understanding what techniques and the return of techniques of understanding design with the user. So then we can go to the donor or whoever we're working with to be able to communicate, okay, so this will take 4 months of time, or however long the process takes, but this is the return on investment that you get over time.
I also think actually on that, in that concept of shifting and change, because Panthea, that you were able to shift so much of what you were doing with the World Bank contract, that is, I think, a record.
It was multiple projects too.
Oh, it was
Over
multiple
time.
projects.
We kept building this relationship. The first two were one, but over
Right.
time we also got patients.
Gotcha, because I think a lot of us are very familiar with the concept of whatever you write in your proposal is 3 years later or 5 years later what they come back and judge you on. And I don't think there's a single person in this room that would want to have their job description, whatever it is today, be the exact job description they expect to get paid on 5 years from now. Are you really living a boring life? And yet we set up entire programs this way, right? It's very hard to change that mid-process. So to me, we need to have that reality check, that pushback, that conversation to say, you cannot design in some of these very, very fluid environments what's going to be 3 years or 5 years from now. We can have a goal, but we have to have that room to shift. And shift radically if we have to. Because it sounded like yours was you shifted radically in what you were aiming over time. If you had multiple projects, it's a lot easier to do it. But the same token, the reality is, oftentimes I feel sorry for the people who do closeouts. Because they come in going, great, 2001 you said this, or 2011 you said this, and now it's 2014. You're already way off the map.
But isn't the idea to achieve the goal? And if you are using technology, you want to be able to pivot, if I use a word that was used really quickly, fast, so that as you go through your grant and you learn things, you change the change as you go along. That's what you want to do, right? Because the goal doesn't change. How you got to the goal, specifically what you did to get there, might.
But actually, I'd push back and say sometimes the goal shifts as well, because you learn more and you want to shift your goal. So, the challenge oftentimes, if you have the what is it, the OIS, OMB, who comes along behind us? Office of Internal Affairs, whatever they are. Well, they'll come along behind and they'll say, okay, you promised X, and you delivered X minus 1 and Y, but you didn't deliver X, so tick. That's a bad mark. So that's that kind of nitty-gritty challenge.
One point I just wanted to make is that as much as I agree that they should be principles for digital development, although I really prefer principles for development in a digital world, I just want to point out that one of the best presentations we had on human-centered design this morning, the entire first element of it had nothing to do with technology.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think it's really important that, and this is one of the problems we're going to have with this when we're constantly talking about technology, is that these principles, in particular human-centered design, have nothing to do with technology. They have to do with you talking to the user. Now, because we're living in a world where ICTs are now becoming so prevalent and are democratized to the point that they are, yes, we're incorporating them because they are there. But I think it's so important for us to really separate the idea of technology necessarily being part of using human-centered design. second point is just to say is that I think with regard to talking to the government, or other, donors, bilateral donors, whatever, is that the fact that the evolution of ICTs is moving so quickly is in itself the reason why we cannot say at the beginning of even a one-year contract, much less 5 years, that we know where this is going. And it's not just because the technology has changed, it's because it changes the way that people organize, communicate, learn. It changes the dynamics within various actors, within networks. And so there's too much change that comes about for us to, really be able to make these promises. And we can point to ICT development as one of the reasons. But those are the types of things I think are arguments we need to bring into that dialogue with the donors.
Mr. Burnett, you're quiet back there. Uncharacteristic.
That's kind of uncharacteristic. Yeah. So I also went to bed really late, so I'm standing with that. I think one of the issues that comes up when you start having conversations about user-centered design, human-centered design, user experience discussions is that if you think about a beneficiary life cycle, you are really mostly focusing on like one use section, but there's a whole lot of other areas where you plug into that life cycle as a group that's running a contract or something like that. And it's almost a question of how do you expand this discussion to have it be about how the technology gets plugged in inside of a particular activity. So, if we're talking about capturing feedback through like on road design or something like that, then you have to ask, okay, from there, what's the next step inside of the project to be able to plug that in? And a lot of times I think that's one of the things that's missing in this discussion. If you're talking about how an NGO comes in and decides to use the technology and apply it, you do have that first like 1 to 6 months usually where they're defining everything at that moment, because they'll usually say, we're going to do this, and then we're going to go on the ground, we're going to figure out what our on-the-ground activities are. Why not plug it in at that point? And then, if you have capture before that where you're looking into that, that would be an area where you probably be wanting to do that design as well, you just don't have the funds for it. So there are definitely areas you could plug that in. The final point that I'd like to make is that we're talking an awful lot about a user, but you actually have got a bunch of different groups in here that you're actually talking about. You've got the user, you've got the donor, you've got the beneficiary, you've got citizens. There's a lot of different things that you can be putting in there. And when we're having these different kinds of users inside of this group, that might also help this discussion a little bit more to think about which group are you actually referring to in terms of your user.
And I think also you make a really good point about the beneficiary timeline or the constituent timeline. In the sense that we've been talking a lot about the initial design of the project, but I love Tapan's concept about making sure that as you go along you have that constituent feedback which can drive the program. And to his point, they took it over, right? I mean, the constituent said, that's great, thanks for starting it off. And to your point, Panthea, you also did it with yours, where the radio station grabbed it and said, thanks for the idea, we're going to do it now, and we're going to own it, which I think for a lot of us, we talk about scale, and we talk about wanting it to grow beyond us, but it's really hard to give up that control. I mean, who has ever opened up their just to do a simple concept, who has ever published what their constituents are saying about the program without a lot of heavy editing involved, right? And we will publish what they say after it's been scrubbed and cleaned by PR, but it's never really we say, okay, whatever you want to say about it, the floodgates are open. And I think that's a false wall that we have now because people have Facebook. They can talk about us whether we want them to talk about us or how we want to talk about us. So I think we have to be quicker about opening up and letting the people that we purport to help actually drive the program while it's ongoing, not just in the design phase.
And then how do you plug that into the continuous improvement that needs to be done?
Oh, please, don't get crazy.
Or just even before as well, like before. So I'm not sure how realistic this is for some of the organizations at the table, but I was speaking to someone from the GE Foundation yesterday who said, a lot. From a corporate foundation yesterday who's saying a lot of their grantees were INGOs, and she realized she's like, INGOs are not in the business of putting themselves out of business. And going to your point, and I think we as an organization are we're small enough that we can we have different metrics by which that are not passed down to us
by which we're measuring our success. I think one of our most successful internally, something that we thought was really successful was we had a donor that wanted to implement an ICT platform to monitor teacher absenteeism, because teacher absenteeism was a huge issue. Teacher performance was low, education results were poor, and we said we didn't want to do the project, but we would do a quick sort of sole source design sprint, a design research sprint, to figure out 3 weeks, cheap. Let's figure out what's going on, why teachers aren't showing up, before we then track to see, track they're not showing up and further punish them. And we found, not surprising, teachers were incredibly demoralized because the policies for managing teachers, the system that they were working within, was crippling. It was, and so if we had gone ahead and implemented that ICT system, it would have further exacerbated the issue, probably led to worse education outcomes. And the donor was not very excited about this result. because they had funding to then implement this ICT system to monitor the teachers. And we said, well, we think this is going to be terrible. And we had been communicating with the government as well around sort of all these results. I'm like, well, we need to change policy. Changing policy, there's not a lot of money that you're pushing out to to change the policy, but we can operate in a different way. I don't know if that is feasible for a lot of the organizations here, but I think having some, rather than what's the process and where does design fit in, can we also talk about doing the user-centered piece before the contract begins? Is there opportunities for some of those short sprints? I don't know, but we thought that was useful.
Go for it.
I just think it's important to just distinguish a little bit between, between our project development cycle and our product development cycle. I mean, a company like Medical Mobile is in the business of developing a product that we are then able to use in our projects if it's the right fit. And so you need to have a research and design process for your project, as well as a long-term and iterative research and design process for your product. And at least at CRS, we've had the opportunity to kind of separate those two. So we're using our technology in the projects, continuing to improve it, but the product development cycle is kind of separated out with an effort to identify separate funding streams to be able to continue to manage the investment in product quality. And so I just think that those challenges definitely exist. It's really a huge funding challenge to get the kind of money you need to do technology well and to build in that research process. But trying to separate the two has been really helpful for us.
Yeah, I just want to string together a few of the comments that people have made, and thinking a little bit creatively, coming back to this idea of practically how are we going to do this. So if you have a project like where you're trying to get information to farmers, and that's a big goal on your program, that's maybe one of 4 big activities. What happens at DAI sometimes is people will come to us and say, okay, we just want to use mobile phones for this. But I think that's an opportunity for us to say, let's talk about this. Let's incorporate the human-centered aspects of this in this overall activity, not for the use of the mobile devices. But and that's going to make that whole activity stronger. And kind of, I think for us, it's a challenge to bring this back to our organization and have a more intelligent conversation about it, where it's not just about, let's go straight to mobile, but let's really think about how to, and it's kind of to your point of going back to the donor to say, we've done this work, we've done this research, we're either going to bring in this partner to work with us, or we're going to use a guide and make sure that we're incorporating it into the overall activity. And then you are taking funding away from some other aspects of that component. And that's, for me, that's a little bit of the internal struggle, is you have to make that argument to your ag specialist to make sure they understand why they would want to incorporate human-centered design into their overall activity. But I think it's also an opportunity, and we're seeing more and more that the donors want innovation, and that way you can integrate it at the beginning. And maybe because you have a 3-year project, just one more quick point, you have a 3-year or 5-year project, you can get away from this, we have to do this in 6 months, and say, we're going to start with human-centered design, and then maybe by year 1 or year 2, we're going to have a pilot out there, or the first iteration of a system that then we'll get feedback on in year 2, and you can kind of have a longer time frame to play with.
Another way to look at user-centered design is, you have business processes for the way you're going to carry out your work. We have a way we do work traditionally. And if you're going to introduce technology, you want to get some benefit. Otherwise, there's no reason to introduce it. And so what you really have to look at is, if you're going to introduce technology, how is it going to change that business process? What impact does it have on all the people that are involved in that business process as it's changing their role, the way they carry out their work? So I think that's important to have happen up front. You know, it's similar to the idea of user-centered design that goes along with it. You know, users do work a certain way, NGOs do work a certain way, you know, today. How is that going to change, and is there a benefit in that change if you're going to introduce technology?
All right, last point from the Google group. Somebody's trying to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in really quickly on this topic. We do definitely use human-centered design to design the interface of our product and the features and functionality from a product standpoint. But I think it's a real mistake when technology companies only look at how they're designing the actual human-computer interaction, and they're not thinking about the larger workflow. So half of our team are technologists, and half of us are public health people. And we go into a situation not with a mobile phone hammer looking for a nail, but we actually go in with a really clear mind and understand what the challenges are and where technology might fit, in which case we get involved, and where other interventions need to actually need to step up, or other infrastructure projects need to take place. So all of our interventions are human plus technology interventions, and thinking about really how that technology piece fits into more programmatic design, which is what most of the people in the audience, I think, are more involved in. So I just want to be sure that there, I guess, is a consideration of the role of human-centered design within that broader programmatic piece. And then, of course, you need an intuitive, well-designed product to plug into that. Anyway, I just wanted to quickly clarify that point.
Could I say something before? Just very quickly. I think listening to the presentations, I think I really like the idea of principles for development in the digital world. That sort of, in my mind, that sort of encapsulates how I'm thinking about this. And then, in terms of a human-centered approach, I think it's important in the design feature, thinking about the Berkeley presentation, about design processes that expand capabilities. And I think that is human, the capabilities approach of Amartya Sen, etc. Most everybody in the room was talking about the connection between digital design and learning. And I think that could be built in a little bit more into the statement, something a little bit more transformative in terms of a statement on design. And I'll leave it there.
Sorry, Wade, but there is somebody you have not been able to see who's trying to say something.
Well, go.
Hi, I see this discussion is centered on the beginning of a project, which can be 5 years. But where we actually are, when we're talking user-centered, a lot of these larger organizations have had these projects longer than the 5 years that they've had them. They've had projects that are follow-ons and rebids. And so when we have this vast amount of knowledge about the users, about the people who are either using technology or not using technology in these projects. And maybe we can think of ways to inject, sort of backfill some of this user-centered design into something that we already have. Instead of, it's harder to get the donor to change the way that they evaluate our proposals, but we might be able to inject a little bit more of this in what we're currently doing, instead of worry about it in the next bid, but also make sure we're injecting this in what we're currently working on. See what you can build that relationship with that donor. Maybe the next rebid, you'll have a little bit more of a technology component, or the next one, you'll have a little bit more time for the design. So it's an ongoing relationship, not just a new, we're going in some place new. A lot of times we aren't going in someplace new. We're going somewhere where we know about the users, and we need to just organize that information in a way to help us design the technology.
Can I just make one quick clarification? Because I think it's really important that, because a few people have touched on this, one of the principal elements of human-centered design is that you do not just do this at the beginning of the project. You do this through the entirety of the project. So I think it's really important that whenever we talk about it, we're just not talking about all this concentration of talking to people at the very beginning. And this is one of the major things that we're going to confront with donors is we're talking about iterating all the way through.
Bingo.
And changing all the way through. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was like, it's good. It's going to be seen as a challenge.
All right, now I want to finish this one if I can. I think you hit on the. It's okay. You hit on the key point here, which at the very beginning, where is the gentleman? Has he escaped already? Maybe. Who started and said that his great concern was principle 5, or no, principle 6 and principle 9. Oh, these are the ones I'm concerned about. I actually think this first one is going to be the hardest to change. It's the one that I think has the giant landmine that no one here, we're kind of dancing around, but the reality is the current procurement process, as it's set up by the largest donors in this field, is set up very much at a waterfall software system where this is, tell us right now what you're going to do over the next 3 years or 5 years, and then we expect you to hit those exact things come hell or high water, right? Which we all know in the very concept of it and the way we work is going to lead to a lot of failure here and there, or at least we can tick all the boxes and hit all the points they want, but it's not going to be effective. And I think the real challenge here is that we have to change the way in which we relate to the donors and the way we work with them and they work with us to be more attentive and be more flexible in the proposal stage and to be a hell of a lot more flexible in the implementation stage and in the monitoring and evaluation process to allow for that iteration, which we all know. I mean, that's why we're in the room. That's the whole design with the user says, let's be flexible with who we're trying to help. And our entire system is set up to be very inflexible in the way that we do that. And I think to me that's just the huge issue, the huge thing. And I feel that all other 8 principles flow out from the problem of that very start of the process, where it's very much a fixed process in what should be a very flexible and intuitive activity. All right, I will shut up now.
Great.
Let's move it over to small working groups.
So what we're going to do next is, take all the discussion we have, continue and actually apply it on a case. And Carol here is going to help us lead it. What I would give you, since it's been 2 hours that you've been sitting on your chairs, congratulations. We will take a break for a couple of minutes. It's 10:56. If we could reconvene around 11 o'clock. So literally 4 minutes. The folks who are from Creative can help show you guys to the restrooms. It's right across from here, and we're going to reconfigure the tables a little bit at the meantime. So go get some food, go to the restroom, and see you in a few minutes. Sure, yeah. Sure, we'll take a little longer. So how do you want to do it? Should we have Quick note for those who are attending online, please stay on. I'm going to put it on mute for a few minutes and then we'll come back on. Thanks.
Yeah. Are you doing? How do you engage?
Right. Please. There, take your seats. Please take your seats.
There's a little bit going on right now. The closest we're new project ideas. Current activities about that.
Is everybody ready to go?
Okay, great.
So now we get to do a little bit of fun. So if you could seat yourself in the room at each one of 4 tables. We're going to break up into small groups. The people on the phone will form one group. And then at these 4 tables, the people in the room, please join one of the tables as your group. So we're going to have a little fun. We're going to do a little exercise now. And what we're going to ask you to do is lay out a plan, how you would have, really just an approach for implementing a CFAIR management system that illustrates the design with the user principle. And so starting out, this is what's happened. A field project manager for an agriculture project in the Central Africa Republic intends to conduct a series of 23 CFAIRs over a 6-month period, reaching 10,000 households. And voucher-based CFAIRs, and I'm going to ask you to take this as a given, they're a well-known approach for distributing planting materials to poor and vulnerable people. So it's an approach that has been used on many projects before and found to have been beneficial, and I'll ask you to take that as a given. It's actually documented, but anyway. So the project managers called you up, and she says that she believes she can create efficiencies in the management of these fairs through the use of technology to register participants and track their use of vouchers. And these fairs are going to begin in 3 months. So at each of your tables, there's an individual who's going to play the user. And you can decide which user they are and ask them questions. And they'll answer your questions. So that will help inform your implementation plan. So Paul Perrin over here. And us, Nate Bartel here at this table. Suzanne Andrews. And I guess the 4th table will answer questions that people might have. And on the phone, Jackie's there, and I think either Or or Ogden can answer questions.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the information you have to start with. So think about what you need to know, and the goal is to come up with how you would approach this problem, kind of lay out a plan for the approach, and then we're going to do a debrief. We're going to hear from each of the tables how they decided to go about this. And we'll have about 5 minutes to debrief, so think about who on your table is going to do the debrief for your table. How many minutes do we have?
I think we have 15 minutes.
Oh, we have about 15 minutes.
Yeah, 15 minutes.
Okay, we're running a little late, so you have to think fast. Okay.
Could we possibly be cut off from the room feed so we can hear each other
Yeah, I was
more
thinking the
clearly?
same thing. If we could be muted, it'll make it easier.
You
Or
wanna-
you guys can mute yourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess Or and I are your interview victims, and you are figuring out how to conduct the seed fair.
So I think, does that only leave, I think there's myself, and then Frederick, are you also still
I'm here. Unfortunately, I have another call at the top of the hour, so I'm going to fade out pretty quickly, but I can participate to start out with.
Okay, so we have a small group, but we can go ahead and start. So, okay, so do you want to tell us a little bit more about how we're just supposed to ask you some questions about.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
you want to start us off?
Yeah. I think let me just put just what is the objective of the exercise. I think just want to make sure that I'm emphasizing the Carol that what we're trying to do is lay out as a plan for implementation of the seedfare management system, but illustrating the design with the user principle. So the questions. So from your side, what questions do you have to ask? So if you take myself and Agnen as users, what questions would you ask us to be able to basically lay out the implementation and plan for seedfare management system? Just to give a background of the seedfares, the field project managers for agricultural project in Central African Republic intend to conduct a series of 23 seedfares over a 6-month period, reaching about 10,000 households. Voucher-based seedfare are known as a approach for distributing planting material to poor and vulnerable people. The project manager believes that she can create efficiency in management of the fair through the use of technology to register participants. The fair will begin in 3 months. So this is as much as background information that you have. So, if you take a design with the users, what typical questions that you would be asking the users to be able to design the system?
Well, my first question is, like, if you are the users, who are you? Are you the farmer, or are you the organizer of the seed fair?
In the seed fairs, you usually will have multiple audience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first approach is try to define who's the audience. And then we can actually divide the roles between myself and Agnen and play different audience.
Yeah, I guess that was my question too. Are we thinking about what's going to work best for like the program manager in terms of on her side, like managing the fairs? Are we thinking about a tool for maybe distributing the vouchers like to the farmers or something like that? So thinking about what they could use themselves to kind of track their vouchers, or to something other than like a paper voucher.
I think it's all around it, because we have multiple stakeholders for the project. Usually you'll try to say, okay, who's my stakeholders? For example, in typical seed fairs, you're gonna probably have a project manager. You're gonna have people that managing the seed fair, and just for our exercise, we give an example of average seed fair includes about 400 beneficiaries, about 20 vendors, managed by 5 field agents. This takes about 6 hours to complete the seed fair.
Could you describe these stakeholders a little bit more? Because you obviously have the farmers that come in and gonna get these vouchers, but you said there's an overall project manager. I think we know what that entails.
Yeah.
And then you said there are vendors and seed fair managers, or people that are organizing the seed fair.
Right, so the vendors would come in with their seeds and they're trying to sell them to your beneficiaries. The beneficiaries are basically the people you're trying to serve. Of course, you need to give them something, so that's coming in the forms of seeds provided by these vendors. Project manager is organizing this event. And there's a couple of Sierra staff, which is, I believe, around 6 or 7 for the non-digital version of this, which usually, when done on paper, takes a lot of activities like coming in, registering the beneficiaries that are participating, registering the vendors that are coming in to provide the seeds, measuring sort of the amount of seeds that these guys are coming with, what types of seeds, and then after the seed fair, you're sort of measuring the amount that they've sold, and you have to pay them for the amount that they've sold. Also, regarding the beneficiaries, you have, like I said, pre-registering them for the event, which entails, taking their name, gender, and some other information, as well as giving them the actual vouchers to them. So, like I said, after the event is over, vendors come into them, you measure them, and you pay them out. The sort of the bottlenecks of any seed fair are those registration and post, counting events, where it takes a lot of people to handle the vendors. Represents a bit of danger because you're bringing in cash to pay the vendors on site. Vendors are angry because they just want to get paid out and leave the site, and so on. So that's the standard paper version. So we're talking about how to improve this using technology.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like for each of the stakeholders, there needs to be kind of a defined business process or set of objectives, and it's great to know the bottlenecks in terms of where things seem to be clogged up, and maybe that's where you start addressing things with technology first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds to me like there could be, a lot of possibility, at least if you focus on, well, you talked about the registration process and, the managing sort of the volume of what the vendors sell and then paying them for that. Yeah, that seems to me kind of where you might start to think about, if you're doing some sort of, registration process where you had, instead of having some sort of paper register, like would it be possible to utilize, can we assume, like, and where we're doing the seed fairs, that there's going to be access to a mobile network or something like that, so we could pull information or be like registering people using like a data collection tool on a tablet or something along those lines?
Okay, I believe you both have very good points. I would start with what Frederick was saying, mapping out the business process.
Okay.
How is this fair being conducted? Where where am I registering my beneficiaries? Who is doing that? How am I doing that? And second, after that, I would start considering, like, what are my options for doing that? Do I want to use digital tools? For sort of to emphasize the point on business processes, at the NetHope conference, I loved, Frederick, I can't remember the name of the NGO, they said not by using technology, just by looking at the processes that were involved for a certain step, which had previously taken 60 days to complete, by just refining and optimizing that process, they ended up to something that took less than 10 days to complete. So I think same principle applies here. If you map out what you're trying to do and how you're going to do it, it makes it a lot easier to design your whatever it is that you're trying to design.
That makes me think, even if you're talking about the seed process later of paying vendors, that even if they might be at their individual stands, like using different measures or different weights in terms of how they're distributing seeds. So if you found a way to say, okay, everyone uses this common measure, or somehow tracks in a way, maybe it's easier at the end to say, okay, you distributed this much of your product, and thus that equals. I don't know. This just makes me think about sort of the processing of, like, how are people counting sort of what they're distributing, and did that make challenges later in determining how much payment they needed to receive after the fair. So I think that makes a good point in terms of your standardizing processes and figuring out how do you streamline those things to make them easier all along the way.
Okay. I think it might be useful here to kind of get the user story from the farmer's perspective. You know, he walks into this seed fair or his pre-register, and what happens when he walks in and they go through the process receiving his vouchers and then take the voucher over to the vendor, and then what happens in that transaction, what information is exchanged, and then basically, and then all the way through kind of maybe the seed delivery process from the farmer perspective. I don't know what all of that looks like. And then sorry, and the same thing from the vendor's perspective. Maybe that vendor has a list of, I don't know, maybe they have a list of pre-registered farmers, and they need to kind of say, okay, I received the voucher in a certain amount from that farmer, I delivered the product, and now I have a record of that, and then I need to go and get my money for that transaction afterwards. But and in any case, for each of these major stakeholders, we need to have kind of the business process, and then look at how they potentially intersect, so that there are common data elements in the back end if you're going to create some kind of a registration transaction database to track all this stuff.
Okay, very, very good. So Frederick, you've pretty much defined your business process for doing this. So what steps at each of those, where can you implement technology at each of those steps?
Well, if you're going to do this, you need to have records of the farmers. So obviously there's a part of on the registration side, you need to have something, and that may even be a place to have some positive impact and create some efficiencies. Now, if people are going to be, now the question is, when they're registered and they come to receive the vouchers, are you still handing out a paper voucher, or can that voucher become some kind of representation of, something that's represented that can be machine read by the vendors when they sit there? I don't know. It's again, you'd have to look at each of the steps in the process to see what makes sense to automate or not.
Well,
how are the users currently registered?
Maybe let me try to walk you what the current process is, so you have a little bit more contextual information about it. So the way today's seed fairs are managed, you have a project manager that works with a dozen of different implementing partner organizations who do agricultural work across country. So each implementing partner hires field agents who are responsible for visiting local villages and qualifying households to participate in the seed fair in 2 weeks preceding the fair. They record information about the household and its members. Then implementing partners supervisor staff also identify vendors from the local area who are willing to participate in a seed fair. They record information about the vendor and planting material they intend to distribute. And they also negotiate maximum seed price. When vendor arrives to set up for the fair, the field agent checks them in, records the presence, weighs the products, inspects the quality, and allocates section of the fair ground where they will be distributing planting material. Tables are set up near entrance of the ground where field agents check in household members, verify they are qualified to participate in a fair, records a presence, and provide them voucher to use in exchange for planting materials. As household member exits the fairgrounds, field agent interviews them regarding the experience and collect information on the quantity, variety, and availability of the seed fair they are purchased or wish to purchase, and how they intend to use it. At the close of the seed fair, vendors queue up at the pay station managed by the field agents, whereby exchange vouchers they have collected for the cash. They are also interviewed regarding the experience. Field agent turns the following reports once they have reached the partner office. list of households participated in the fair and their characteristics, list of vendors participating in the fair and characteristics, record of the voucher provided to each household, record of the cash provided to a vendor, answer to the interview question posed to a household member and a vendor. Then a partner office supervisor collects the information and provides it to a project manager. That project manager takes this vendor stuff, then digitalize the information and provide reports to a donor. So this is a current process. So if you try to implement the Seedfair system, knowing that who's your audience, what additional information you would need to know, or how would you go about doing that?
So, or these field agents, obviously currently they collect all the stuff on paper and everything. Do the field agents themselves participate in the fair? It sounds like they're doing pre-registration of farmers and households, right?
Yes.
And they may also do pre-registration of vendors. So then they write all this stuff down on certain forms, and that's being brought to the seed fair, and these agents, they participate in the seed fair?
Yes.
And once the seed fair kicks off, is there any possibility for kind of on-site registration? Can farmers come in and qualify to be registered at the seed fair, or do they all have to be pre-registered?
It is a possibility that farmer can come in and register at the seed fair itself.
Okay. Okay, so obviously this process, this whole thing about pre-registration and registration seems like to be a good place to start with some automation. Now the question is, once you register people and then they show up at the seed fair, you can issue vouchers. And the question is the amount of the vouchers, is that predetermined based on kind of a household size or something?
Yes.
Okay. So there's data elements that there needs to be collected based on, the household size and circumstances there, and that would automatically then generate some kind of value for the voucher and the amount of seed that the farmer can get.
Yeah, I see the value in, developing, the tool that would be used to kind of register households and, record some of this key data when they're visited in the field. And then, again, when they check in for the seed fair, you'd have their information and could issue their voucher and check them in. Then it seems that there's also the value in a tool that tracks vendors, and then maybe you talked about a process where they kind of check in and you weigh what they've brought and check in for quality. So then if you can put that information in at the end of the fair, then you do a similar process maybe of weighing and put that information in, and maybe that helps you then calculate what their payment is going to be based on kind of what they brought and what they have at the end. So there'd also be a way to kind of better track that, maybe be kind of a more transparent process in terms of if you're having issues with the vendors who are concerned about if they're getting the right payment or how everything was processed. So I think having this all in a central repository might help to make the process more efficient and also more transparent, and just in general really help the organization track the vendors they've worked with in the past and also the farmers they've worked with in the past. So I think that seems like a key. And then of course people might think about are we doing the vouchers for the farmers? Are we just giving them a paper voucher when they check in? Are they getting some sort of mobile voucher? But it seems like in the beginning the focus on helping move the process might be the automation of these two elements that we've been discussing.
I'd like to understand a little bit the kind of the process. Once I'm a farmer and I go pick up my voucher, now what do I do with that? Do I go around to the different seed vendors and look at their prices? And is the voucher something that says, okay, you get so many kilos or a certain amount of seed, or is it a a currency value, so you get a certain amount of money to spend. So I mean that obviously would be very and do I have a determination of quality of the seeds from the various vendors? Is that something that I need to determine myself as a farmer, or is that laid out somewhere for me that this seed is better than that seed?
So for your first question, what's the composition of the voucher? So voucher is composed of multiple coupons that have different illumination. For example, think about as you have a big sheet of it's a voucher, and you have a coupon that's worth, say, $5, $10, $30, $40.
Okay.
So it's like money.
And those dollar amounts aren't tied to a corn seed versus some other types of seeds. I can more or less use these currency amounts on any type of seed that's available in the fair.
Correct. Yes.
Cool. So it becomes money, more or less.
Yeah.
And is there anything you mentioned something about quality measures of the seeds on the vendor side? Is there when vendors are registered, is there some kind of predetermination of quality and price, so that that's kind of published and transparent to the farmer?
Yes. A usual process is when before the seed fair, they're usually gonna try to do a market price data. For example, they're planning to sell just let's say cassava seeds or cassava, or they're planning to sell some other seeds, and we're gonna determine based on the market price data in the area, and also in some cases we're also gonna have before the seed fair starts, we're gonna have negotiation process between the representative of beneficiary and representative from the vendor. We're going to determine, okay, for these type of seeds, this is the maximum amount as a vendor can charge.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. But these are, it kind of becomes a market where the farmer walks around with their voucher and they see prices at the individual vendors' stalls, type of thing?
Yes.
Okay. And to me, at least I've never been to any of these seed fairs, but that seems to be something that might be more complicated to automate than just this registration and voucher issuing. So I'd probably start out on the registration piece, and then issuing of these vouchers, and whether those vouchers, at least initially, probably would still be paper vouchers, but maybe they could be something that's an electronic record somewhere. But then now, obviously, the vendors would need to have some equipment, or they have access to the centralized database for the seed fair. So that increases complexity and probably time for development of all this.
Okay.
That sounds like good thinking to me. I think I was thinking along similar lines about, how much more kind of, especially we have the 3-month time window, and, in the future, I can see people interested in saying, okay, well, every vendor also gets like a mobile device, and, that kind of almost, this reminds me of, some of the programs CRS has done, or I saw a presentation once where they were doing mobile vouchers for like a food distribution program in Haiti, and the vendor used a mobile device almost like the cash register, and that they'd put the person's ID in, and then that would deduct money from their account. But it's the kind of thing you could maybe do if you had a little bit more time for and I also think about some of the contexts within the country, or just thoughts about the setup for this type of system where you'd be automating the transactions, the vouchers. But certainly, I guess the other thing I was thinking about too is what you really brought up was the issue of the cash, the danger of bringing cash to the seed fair, and the vendors wanting to get their payments more quickly. is there any thoughts that, you know, there could be, do the vendors like have, you know, traditional bank accounts? Like, could they receive mobile payments? Like, is there a way at least to take the cash or out of that process? Do you have any insights or can share any insights on sort of the cash or sort of like the digital payments environment?
Yeah, let's
I really
say,
like that thinking that because these things, they don't necessarily need to be completely tied together. In, you know, you have this registration stuff, you have the vouchers, and the vouchers then being collected by the vendor, and then in order to settle up with the vendor, it's basically be some kind of, it could be an independent system in terms of what they. In any case, I gotta run, guys.
Okay. Sounds like we're about to go back anyway.
Yeah, but let's say that there is a mobile money operator in the country.
Okay.
I think our design with a user view overview. You know, we need to come to closure. So what we're going to do is go around. We're going to go around each of the tables and see what your thoughts were, how you would approach the problem. So who would like to go first?
I'll be brave, as I usually am.
Okay, so I am going to go first.
All right, so we
have
have
about 5 minutes.
Yeah, we have a wonderful. Can people on their phone mute? What a wonderful source of information, a wellspring of information. Thank you. Who did reveal that actually there is a several hundred-page manual that she was cheating from. And, or not cheating. Nobody's read. You didn't have it? So it's really interesting. We started with the very concept of, she started with, okay, don't mess with the seed fair. We're going to sit and take it given that seed fair is successful. And the first thing we did was, so let's think about this word seed fair. I think though, we had some really interesting ideas, some different ideas. I don't feel that we got to any of them that we thought would be great recommendations because we found out, first of all, that the funding was fixed. So any intervention that we tried to bring in would have to be taking away from something else they've already thought of doing. And it's really hard, we feel, you have to design with flexibility. You have to be flexible to begin with to be able to design with flexibility because whatever we did would take away from whatever is happening now, and to try to assume those level of efficiencies right from the beginning was a very high-risk assumption. So our view was that it'd be great if we had time, space to innovate on this, to think about how to do it better, and then we could come in like the basic concepts of ink printing for people so that you could only come and get one voucher of send in one line for a voucher, because once you got a voucher you get an ink print on your thumb, rather than I send one line and then I send another line. And then the same concept of, from that we get up to having each voucher like numerically unique identifier, or take the voucher and go to any buyer because of this, you have this voucher versus just the ones at the seed fair. And then all the way to the concept if you were able to amortize your investment over not just 23 seed fairs, but 230 or 2,300 or etc., you get to a really cool point of sale system. So at every your mobile data collection, as you go out and register these farmers, would be a picture, and they get a card, and when they come in, the card would come up on the screen. They'd see the photograph. They would go and get their seed inputs and what that. But that would be something that you'd have to design as a company-wide, that you have to invest in over time versus just these 23 fairs. So the long and the short of it, we thought we actually had some great cards that we designed that we were drawing, figuring out where things went. But at this point, our big learning was you have to have space to design. You have to have space and flexibility to be flexible and innovative.
That was your big learning.
Oh, well, my big learning.
Sorry, can I add?
James, I was not.
Yeah, exactly. To the point of the cards, I think what was really interesting about this is that we realized that system is pretty complex and sort of multi-layered. The stakeholders involved are many, and they have different roles, from the project manager at the sort of at the top, as it were, or somewhere, to the who then works with implementing partners, who then hire agents, who then go and register the farmers, seek out the vendors, and then also worry about implementing the seed fair. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different stakeholders we just identified there. Again, working at different levels of the system, who have different needs and expectations, etc. And we also did a little bit of the work, kind of a workflowy sort of thing with the cards. So we thought there are things that happen before the fair that we could look at. There are things that happen during the fair that we could look at in terms of opportunities for efficiencies, and also things that might happen after the fair. So in addition to those things that Wayne mentioned, I think going through the process and using these cards, thank you for drawing, it's much better than mine. This was very helpful, and we discovered some things just in these 15, 20 minutes that were really useful.
Okay, next table. And here, maybe we should use the mic so that people in the room.
You got the microphone, go.
Oh, I was the facilitator.
You want to start?
Want to give our opening comments?
Yes.
Okay, all right. One of the things
He's the
is
quiet
this was not unanimous, but we didn't get to take a vote. But we only had one vocal dissenter. So I would say that it was almost unanimous. One of the things that we observed from the very beginning was that, particularly with regard to today's theme, and today's theme being human-centered design, is that the exercise did not allow us to actually do that. And the reason why is because the exercise was about technology. And it was about what is the technological fix to this situation. Because I think that most of us, when we first looked at this, our first questions were whether is this the best way for people to get the seeds? What do we know about the farmers? And there were a lot of flaws to the program, for example, because a paper was being lost and certain things couldn't be tracked. But when you look particularly at a situation such as CAR and issues of security, and the fact that vouchers and these types of things can actually be used for exchange, they can be taken by rebel leaders. I mean, there's just so many different variables here. It was kind of hard for us to actually get back to the very beginning of, is this actually the best way for people to be getting seeds? So we had to go all the way up to just address what are the flaws with the system. And so with regard to just addressing the flaws with the current system, which is looking at a technological fix, I think Panthea had some interesting ideas with regard to how to approach it in a way that you could start to address the problem the best you could with the information you had, but then also make it as much about a learning process to get more information on, for example, whether or not the farmers really were getting the seeds, or if this is really what they wanted, or if it was actually the same farmers who were giving the vouchers were the ones who were returning home with the seeds or whatever. But I don't know if you wanted to go into some of that.
Sure. So, of course, for this exercise, we're assuming the seed fairs are the best way to do this, and we thought it could be useful to take a look at some of the different users that are operating sort of in this seed fair distribution and then feedback system, sort of getting the information back to the implementing partners. Yes. And so we thought what we may be able to do is to, so some of the challenges identified were lost records, inaccurate data, which is assumed to be a challenge with the field workers, a bunch of different things. And we said we don't necessarily sort of know why, for example, records are getting lost or not the right data is being inputted. And so can we understand, for example, taking 3 users, take a look at what the beneficiary sort of experience is as they're sort of going through the seed fair. So what kind of information are they being asked for? Do they feel comfortable giving this information? Is the data inaccurate because it's not being captured correctly, or because false information is being provided, and understand what their experience is as they're going through and answering this survey at the end. Sure. Yes, we have a survey. Yes, and as they're sort of going through this process to be able to get the seeds.
And then we thought we could look at, for example, at the field worker who is facilitating some of the interactions at the seed fair, and understand what their process is, what some of the challenges that they're facing, but also really trying to get to know them. So, for example, is paper getting lost or vouchers getting lost, or are they, being used in some other way? What are the constraints that these field workers face? Do they have the resources and the training that they need to be able to do their work? Because we can, design the technology system, but we also need to give them support and training. So to understand some of the factors that they face, we would need to have a better understanding of their experience in this particular context. And then finally, a third user group that may be interesting for us to look at would be the folks that would have to process the information that is coming back. So we know that sort of time is a huge issue. There's time lags. Again, is that, are there sufficient people? Do they have the capacity and training, whatnot? And so take a look at these 3 different user groups to then understand where technology may be able to be inserted to improve efficiencies. And we also talked about, of course, having to take a look at the operating context. So understanding if we're using mobiles, connectivity, access, literacy, tech literacy, numeracy, whatnot, and be able to essentially sort of test a couple of different assumptions around what technologies may make sense in this context. So we more had a process, but did we have a solution-ish as well?
That was all the time we had.
Yes.
Should we do the online one next?
Yeah, should we do the online one next? People online?
We had some similar thoughts to what has been discussed already. We've spent a lot of time thinking about sort of the overall, trying to understand the overall process and therefore get a sense of what, the bottlenecks were and where, the main issues came up, and, got a good sense of, again, I, heard the first group talk about, there's a lot of different players, there's a lot of different things happening, so there's a lot of different places where maybe there could be improved efficiencies or think about different ways, and kind of we've started even saying that, some of the improvements might not even be anything that has to do with technology. It might just really be a better mapping of the process and the players and how some of the different, how some of those different things could be done to make all those processes and all those different parts kind of better speak to each other. But, what we did end up really thinking a lot about, we, ended up thinking a lot about the registration process and the fact that we have field agents going out and collecting information on households as they're being registered for the fairs, and how that could potentially become better as a digital process rather than being used with just paper tools. So then when they are showing up to the fairs, we already have information, kind of check them in to a system, and then distribute their vouchers and keep track of their participation programs over time that way. And also something that just came up is the challenges that they've had kind of with the vendors, especially the vendors getting frustrated at the end of the fairs because it's tricky for them to kind of figure out sort of what amount they're going to get back for the seeds they just sold, and that they want to get paid right away, and there's just been some challenges there. So we're thinking to, it can make that process more efficient and transparent. When the vendors check in, they weigh what they bring, and we could put that into some sort of digital tool. Okay, you checked in with this amount, and then at the end you had this amount left. That means you get this much payment, and then potentially look at if there's a better way, because they talked about the concern that they now have to bring large sums of cash to the event. So is that a place to look at potential for digital payments instead, to make that process again a little bit safer, more efficient, and more transparent? So we thought a little bit about that, sort of check out process, sort of settling up process of the seed vendors is somewhere that seemed to have some issues and could potentially benefit from really looking at the process and how that could be improved to make that smoother. So those are some of the areas that we really thought a lot about.
Okay. Do we want to go to the next table down here?
Oh, I'm talking, so I am talking. We
we did a lot of talking around like the big philosophical questions in this. I think that we had a fair amount of discussion that was actually around how teams are actually built inside of an organization to be able to address these issues. So you've got maybe like a technology team that is normally responsible for building the actual technology, but a lot of knowledge is actually housed inside of other areas. And one area where this process could probably be built out a little bit more is having more crossover between those groups. We also argued on the opposite end that a lot of different groups have multiple teams that are, like, if you look at how a product design team inside of some of the private sector and the tech world operate, there's a lot of times more of an iterative process where there are several different teams that are going through, use case development and going to like user testing and things like that. And you have a product design team and things like that. And so those groups still are able to deal with that engagement as well, without having as much crossover between teams. We then said, okay, there's a few other things that should be considered. One is that there should probably be a problem definition that gets established up front. We don't really actually know what the problem is based around the background that's set up. There's probably a few different ones that need to be established. The best way to be able to do that would be to have conversations with multiple user groups. Some of our user groups that were defined included field agents, households, vendors, the donor, the actual project manager, groups like that. Then when we went back to, well, how would this actually happen, since it's very possible you're going to be told you have a total of 9 months to roll something like this out, we said, you define your problem statement for the first couple of weeks. You have like a couple of different engagement sessions with users where you're defining what you're building out. And what that technology should actually be. From there, you would have a wants and needs definition of what are the wants and needs of the different user groups. Then you basically bump into kind of an agile structure where you're going through an iterative design process with the users involved throughout the process. You'd have a first launch probably at the end of the at the 3-month launching of the seed fair. And then you would go into several different iterative designs where you're improving upon that over the course of the next 6 months that the activity is going on. That's assuming that you're doing this because you're CRS and you do a lot of seed fairs already, and you're probably going to be using this for future projects as well.
And how about our last one?
I think for our table, we were just wrapping our heads around what seed fair is and sort of understanding what the process is. In regards to the theme for the day and designing with users, we plugged we asked multiple questions of our beneficiaries. We focused mainly on the manager, the vendor, and the beneficiaries to really determine what the requirements are for making the system more efficient and effective. And we didn't get beyond asking these multiple questions from multiple perspectives, and we kept at it. So that's basically what we were up to during this time. And we raised a lot of the issues that have already been mentioned by other tables. Understanding the manager's perspective, the registration process, the vendor's constraints, particularly at checkout, issues of fraud, difficulties in managing a paper-based system in a low-resource environment. And we understand that this is basically the vouchers would be for this one-day event. This is a voucher system per se, and the whole fair is a 5 to 6 hour process with 500 beneficiaries. So I think if we were to continue our discussion, we would be thinking about the sort of the limited nature of the event and the need here. I don't know, maybe my colleagues have other things to add.
Okay, well, very good. What I thought I would do is tell you how this process actually played out. Not that we did it the best way, and there would be room for improvement, but we were actually faced in CRS with this exact problem. There was actually an innovation grant process involved originally. We had put out a call for integration of grants, and one of the project managers in our Central Africa Republic Country Program came back and proposed the use of barcoding technology. They were interested in that, and could that be used to improve, the efficiency of the seed fairs that they were about to conduct. And they were going to conduct, 25 seed fairs, about 10,000 households involved in that to distribute seed. And CRS has a fairly well-defined process for conducting seed fairs that they've used since about 2000 and found successful in a number of environments. And essentially, and so they had a small amount of innovation money which would pay for the support of architects to help them design the process, but then they had to convince the donor to pay for the implementation cost of the project. The first thing that happened after the award was given was the architects and agriculture technical advisors got together with the manager of the seed fair and said, tell us how you do a seed fair. So go through the process. How do you do it today, and what are the pain points in that process? And then, after discussing that and looking at where there might be opportunities to improve that process through the technology, they laid out a process about how they thought they go about conducting the seed fairs. And that involved traveling to villages in the seed fair area, offline beneficiaries prior to the seed fair, pre-registering them to participate using mobile devices, and issuing them barcoded ID cards. And then the second step in that process was registering vendors that were going to set up stalls at the seed fair, also using mobile devices, and also giving them barcoded ID cards. And then checking beneficiaries in at the seed fair using mobile devices, scanning the barcoded vouchers that they were given to use at the fair, and having them sign on the mobile device for the vouchers. And then interviewing beneficiaries as they exited the seed fair to gauge their satisfaction with the services they received. And then at the very end of the seed fair, collecting and scanning vouchers that beneficiaries exchanged with vendors for seeds at the end. And then issuing and recording payments to the vendors based on voucher amounts, and then creating the reports from that data that was that had been collected using mobile devices, being able to issue reports to the project management team, the supervisors of the implementing partners who hired the field agents to do this were auditors and project donors. They went through a pretty a structured process of identifying the users that would be involved in understanding them. So they had French-speaking field workers that would use mobile devices to register beneficiaries. Many of them who had never used, because they use smartphones, had never used a smartphone before. The vendors also, the vendors also were French-speaking, but literate. The field agents, were literate. The beneficiaries, of course, many of them were not. And the staff was English-speaking. They figured out that this seed fair was going to be conducted in an area where there was no internet connectivity and there was no access to power. So following that discussion, the architects, they traded off at several technology solutions, and they were looking for a commercial automated data collection system that could be very quickly tailored, so that they could make adjustments as they go along. So and one that would work in a disconnected mode, and that would synchronize data automatically to the cloud, so it could be pulled, reviewed, and used to produce reports. And they selected a company to provide that, one that had a good customer base and had a lot of experience in use in of it, though not in that particular environment, not in the middle of Central Africa, but in other situations. And then that situation was configured, as that was done, the forms and reports were reviewed with the project manager in Central Africa. The next thing they did was a conference room pilot. So then they went in country, they brought in the implementing partners, basically, and you'll see in the case study that was handed out, they learned some things from the implementing partners that they hadn't anticipated in the way that a CFAIR was run. So one of them was the process that they went through with vendors at the beginning of the CFAIR to make sure that they knew how much seed they bought to the fair, weighed it, checked its quality, so that when they exited the CFAIR, they could verify that they had actually, for the vouchers turned in, they were actually had distributed that amount of seed. And then after that they did that, then they did a pilot. So they did one seed fair and went through training, the enumerators, found that they were able to quickly grasp the use of smartphones, because that was one of the concerns, would they have trouble, doing it. And then following that pilot, they went on and did the rest of the seed fairs. One of the surprising things that happened in the first pilot was that there was a complaint that they couldn't synchronize the data between devices at the fair itself. So what they discovered in that first pilot was that, field agents that were checking in people, they had this problem with people jumping lines, like they could go in one line and get vouchers and then go on the next. And the second field agent would know that the first person had vouchers already. So they thought synchronizing data would be good. Also, the supervisors were concerned about people being out in the field for a couple of weeks without looking at the data they were collecting, making sure there were no issues with the information that was collected. So what we did after that, and this took a little bit longer, so it didn't happen in the next seed fair, we worked with the provider of the technology, the data collection technology, and they developed what they called a Thunderplug device, which is essentially a local wireless network that you can take out into the field with you, connects, and allows you to synchronize data during the fair and bring that back. So that, and the other interesting thing about this whole thing was, the innovation grant, we had money to support the design of the system, but we didn't have money to buy devices and for the software licenses and so forth. And initially the project manager came back and said, well, I can't get more money from my donor. What am I going to do? This was a nice idea. We thought it would be a good idea to try out, but where am I going to get that money? So we did a trade-off. We figured out all the costs that were involved in terms of hiring people and then paying people to digitize the data and to do follow-ups in order where they had data issues where the data didn't come in. And they actually found that they would be almost break even on that. There was a couple $1,000s difference. And then the donor said for that couple $1,000s difference, it was really worth it to get data much more quickly from the field at the close of the fair. And they did measure, what was achieved during the fair. They found in the first fairs, they found a 50% savings in labor. In subsequent fairs, as people have learned to do this more effectively, it's gone up to 75%. So there is a huge savings in labor to do the fair. And obviously, even though they were able to pay for the devices, and by the way, they used iOS devices, which are for smartphones. You can get the same, applications that were used on Android devices today, which would be even cheaper. But even with those iOS devices, they were able to break even on those initial seed fairs. Seed fairs have been used in about 7 countries since then. And there have been improvements people are beginning to experiment with. One of them is around the ability to do mobile money transfers, so you don't have to carry cash out into the field. So that's something projects are beginning to look. But they've been able to take that system and then improve it, replicate it, and improve it, from fair to fair. The other thing they learned, by the way, on the first use of the, which I forgot to mention, was that the barcode scanning wasn't fast enough for checking out vendors. It's fine for bringing people into the fair, but the original technology they were using to check out, it took people too long to scan the vouchers, and so they had to do an improvement there, and that technology is swapped out, in order to be able to do that part of the fair, efficiently as well. So, so that's just kind of, an interesting thing about how that experience went. It's been really beneficial, for the people involved. I mean, the whole process was very well accepted by the implementing partners, by the field agents, by the people who didn't mind getting their pictures taken, as part of the process. But it's also one that's iterated, so each time we do a seed fair, there are improvements made to the system. So being able to iterate, I think, based on the user feedback you get from fair after fair has been important as well. So any questions on that? That's just what actually happened with that particular set of seed fairs.
You mentioned the drastic labor reductions. At the end of the day, was your estimated budgets, the sort of like plus or minus a couple $1,000s, ended up holding true?
Yeah, it did. Now, I will say, because I told this table when I was playing the user, that there was no money, that you had to break even. And there was that innovation up front that allowed the investigation and initial trade-off of technologies. But we find that the implementing part of it, to actually implement it in country, go through all that training of enumerators and so forth, we actually save money on that. And so we did, we were able to, closely break even on that first one. But then if you think about it over time, I mean, the particular data collection platform application we used, which is from a company called Xerion Software, that was our first use of it. It's been used by 147 projects across the world to do things like surveys and beneficiary registration and data collection in different sectors and different geographies. And as a result of that, we now have, a volume discount, for that application, so it's even cheaper for people to use it. Phones, we started out with iOS devices. A lot of people are using Android devices. We are now looking at whether we can standardize as an agency on a particular device, again, to get volume discounts. And the devices are reusable, so, they can be reused from one project situation and from one project to the next as well. So the savings over time, I think, grow, from where you start. But a lot of things resonated for me today. I don't know about you. The fact that when you're thinking about systems, there are multiple users involved. You have to worry about that. Knowing that while design with the user is really nice, you're not going to get it necessarily all up front. You have to really have a process where you can quickly, as our first speaker said, pivot, based on what you're hearing, make adjustments as you go along in the process. And as an NGO, it's been particularly important for us to reuse work that other people are doing. If we had to develop products from scratch as an NGO, I mean, we would never get there. I mean, that's not our core business. We're not an IT company, so what's really important to us are technology partners that can bring that technology to the table and then work with us to quickly adjust their product based on what we're learning in the field. That's been really important for us as well.
We go to Stephanie, and thanks, Carol, and that's a great way to end this, because it's a call to action. It's our role to design with the user, and not. That's really what I got out of this. So Thank you, Carol, for bringing this real case that CRS did and sharing it with people here. There's on the printouts that you'll have, you can read it. It'll be online as well. And feel free to direct questions to Carol outside. But since we have to get out of the room pretty soon, I just want to thank everybody for coming out here and spending your entire morning with us. That's huge. Hopefully, it was a good learning experience. Thanks to the people who joined remotely from as far as California to Guatemala. So thank you very much. And if on your way out, if you'd like to continue to hear about the other events that we're going to be having in this series, there's a sign-up sheet right by the poster over there. If you could just make sure you put your email down, that'd be great. And then lastly, I want to thank the people who have helped make this happen. Apart from all of you over here, special thanks to Dina, Michael, Kelly, Wayne from FHI, Norman here from Creative, and Creative in general to help host this. So thank you all of you, and hope to see you all soon again.
Interesting about this list of answers is that questions were going to be that we were going to answer.
I hope you asked them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it means to me that, or it seems yes, to me that clearly you guys did a good job of asking the right questions and getting the right information.
Which of these are we not?
Yeah, there you go.
Where's our biases? Where do we prioritize?
Well, the thing that we learned is really important. Because they're going to be